Hello beautiful people. Welcome to No Harry. In today's episode, we explore, what if Gringotts emergency scan found 67 tracking spells on Harry and declared magical war on Britain. Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Scan, continued. I'll explain Mordrak's clause first, Ragnar said. Then we'll discuss what happens to you. Then you may ask questions. In that order, because the order matters. Harry nodded. Gringotts was founded on a single principle above all others, Ragnar said. The inviolability of a client's person and property. Not their gold. Not their vaults. Their person. A wizard who deposits gold in Gringotts is protected by us, not merely their assets, but their physical and magical self, insofar as magical interference is concerned. This is not sentiment. It is contract law, older than the British Ministry of Magic by 400 years. He laid a document in front of Harry. It was written in several languages simultaneously, the text running in columns, and at the top was a seal that looked like it had been pressed into the parchment by something very heavy and very final. Mordrak was a Gringotts director in 1612, Ragnar continued. A wizard noble family in what is now Germany attempted to place compulsion enchantments on 3 of our goblin account managers in order to siphon vault access. When we discovered this, Mordrak did not file a complaint with the local magical authority. He declared war. He pursued the family through 7 countries and 4 decades, stripped them of every asset they held, and when the last of them attempted to flee to the Americas, he had them interdicted at sea by a Gringotts enforcement vessel. A pause. We won. The clause bearing his name has been invoked 11 times in the 400 years since. It has never failed to result in a complete resolution in Gringotts' favor. Harry looked at the seal on the document. And you're invoking it now. We invoked it 43 minutes ago. The moment our scan returned its results. Ragnar's voice didn't change in pitch or volume, but something in it became very precise, very deliberate, like a blade finding its edge. What was done to you, Mr. Potter, was done to a Gringotts client. 67 magical constructs embedded without consent into the person of someone under our protection. Under our law, this constitutes an act of magical war against this institution, and we are responding accordingly. Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about asking why Gringotts cared, whether it was really about principle or about something else, something financial or political. He looked at Ragnar's face and decided that was the wrong question. Not because it wouldn't have an interesting answer, but because it didn't actually matter. Whatever Ragnar's reasons were, they had resulted in 3 goblins coming through his garden wall at 7 in the morning and removing him from Privet Drive, and that was a fact, and facts were what he had to work with. Who cast the spells? Harry asked instead. Ragnar reached into the document case a 3rd time and produced a 2nd sheet of parchment. He laid it on the table but kept his hand flat on top of it for a moment, and for the first time since Harry had met him 40 minutes ago, he paused, not for effect, Harry sensed, but because he was making a genuine decision about something. This information will be upsetting, Ragnar said. I gathered that, Harry said. From the bit where there are 67 of them. Something moved across Ragnar's face. Not quite a smile. Goblins, Harry would learn, didn't smile the way humans did, it was more of a tension release around the eyes, a fractional relaxation, but something adjacent to it, something that acknowledged him as a person rather than a problem. Ragnar lifted his hand from the parchment. Harry looked at the list. The first name on it was Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, and next to his name was a number, 38. 38 out of 67 spells cast by a single person. More than half. The earliest dated notation next to his name was from 1981, the year Harry was born, and the most recent was from 1990. 9 years of consistent, deliberate magical interference. Harry read the name twice. He read the number twice. He did not say anything for a long moment. The second name on the list was Petunia Desley, née Evans. Next to her name, 4, the notation beside them read proxy casting, spells applied via physical contact objects, caster not directly magical. Enchanted objects introduced into subject's environment. Harry thought about the lumpy pillow on his cot. The scratchy blanket. The too small jumper Aunt Petunia had given him in a rare moment he'd spent years trying to interpret as kindness. The third name was someone called Severus Snape. 7 spells. Dated 1985 through 1989, years when Harry had never met the man, never heard his name. There were 4 more names below that, some of them familiar, some not. He read all of them. He read all the numbers. He read the dates. Then he put the parchment down and looked at the water glass, which was empty. The goblin from before appeared at his elbow immediately and refilled it without being asked. Harry drank half of it. "Dumbledore," he said. His voice was even. He noticed it was even and filed that away. "He's the headmaster of Hogwarts." "Yes. He's also supposed to be, people say he's the greatest wizard alive." "That is the prevailing opinion," Ragnock said, in a tone that suggested he had several thoughts about prevailing opinions and none of them were complimentary. "And he put 38 spells on me starting from when I was about a year old." Harry looked up from the glass. "What were they for? Specifically?" Ragnock gestured to a goblin at the far table, who crossed the room and laid a third document in front of Harry. This one had annotations, each spell listed with a plain English description of its function. Harry read through them methodically. 17 tracking spells. 6 emotional suppression enchantments, the ones that flatline strong feelings before they could surface properly. For loyalty compulsions, each one keyed to a specific person or institution, loyalty to Hogwarts, loyalty to the headmaster's guidance, loyalty to the concept of sacrifice for the greater good, loyalty to authority as represented by magical institutions. 3 memory dampeners. 2 that were listed simply as narrative control, subject more likely to accept given interpretation of events as natural and correct. 1 that made the list of Harry's stomach drop slightly when he read the annotation, glamour suppression, prevents full manifestation of subject's physical presentation, including magical aura projection. He'd been made smaller. Literally made smaller, in ways that showed. And 2 at the very bottom of Dumbledore's column, dated 1981, the earliest entries on the entire document, that were listed as, blood ward anchoring compulsions, subject compelled to return to and remain within designated blood ward location, resistance to departure strongly suppressed. Privet drive. Dumbledore had made sure he couldn't leave. Harry sat back in the chair. He was aware of Ragnock watching him. He was aware that the room had gotten very quiet, the industrious scratching of the other goblins' quills somehow stilled. He was aware that the stone walls of this underground chamber were cool and solid and smelled of deep earth, and that above him, somewhere on the surface, Aunt Petunia had found the kitchen empty and was probably furious. He felt something moving in his chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was something older and less nameable than either, something that had been there for a long time pressed very flat by 6 of Dumbledore's enchantments, and now with the scan having catalogued them, with the fact of them named and numbered and laid out in a document on a stone table, it was pushing upward with quiet, implacable force. He let it push. "All right," he said. He picked up the parchment again. "Walk me through Snape. 7 spells from a man I've never met. Starting when I was 4. Ragnock nodded. "Our investigators are still building the full picture on several of the casters. What we know about Snape is that he is a Hogwarts professor, currently potions master, and that he had a relationship with your mother before her death. The spells he cast are consistent in type with what an expert occlumency and legilimency practitioner would use to," Ragnock paused, searching for the most accurate word, "precondition a subject. To make them more susceptible to certain kinds of influence on later encounter." Harry stared at him. "He was setting me up. Years before I arrived at his school. That is our current interpretation." "For what purpose?" "That," Ragnock said, "is one of the questions this investigation will answer." Harry set the parchment down very precisely, aligning its edge with the edge of the table. It was a small, deliberate gesture, the kind of thing he did when he needed his hands to be doing something controlled while his mind worked. "What does Mordrak's claws actually do?" he asked. "Practically. What changes?" "Several things change immediately," Ragnarok said, and now he was in his element: facts, procedure, consequence, and his voice found a rhythm. "First, Gringotts assumes formal protective custody of your person until the matter is resolved. You are our client and you have been attacked, we are therefore responsible for your safety. Second, we file with the International Confederation of Wizards, bypassing the British Ministry of Magic entirely, formally notifying the ICW of what has been found. Third, our legal department begins action against each named caster. Fourth, we begin removing the spells." "How long does removal take?" "For 67 interlocking constructs, several of which were placed on an infant and have been embedded for a decade, our cursebreakers estimate 2 to 3 days. It will not be comfortable." Harry absorbed this. "Will I be different after?" The question came out quieter than the others, and he was aware of it as soon as it landed, aware that it was the real question, the one underneath all the procedural ones, the one that had been sitting in his chest since he'd read the words emotional suppression and narrative control and understood what they meant. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You will be yourself. Without interference." He paused. "What that means specifically, I cannot tell you. I have never met you without 67 spells on you." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Harry he couldn't think when to measure it from. Possibly ever. "Neither have I," Harry said. Ragnarok nodded, once. Then he rose and said, "Come. I will show you where you'll be staying. The Cursebreakers will begin their assessment this afternoon." Harry picked up his tin box and followed. The rooms Gringotts had for clients in protective custody were not the opulent affairs Harry might have imagined from a bank this wealthy. They were clean, practical, underground, stone walls softened by rugs and tapestries, a narrow bed with good blankets, a desk, a bookshelf already stocked with what appeared to be a working library of magical texts. The bathroom had hot water that came out of the taps at exactly the right temperature without adjustment. Harry stood in the shower for 11 minutes, which was 9 minutes longer than Aunt Petunia's household rules permitted, and felt the hot water on the back of his neck like a small, private victory. A set of clothes had been laid out on the bed, goblin-tailored, which meant they fit properly, which was an experience so unfamiliar that he put them on slowly, checking each layer. Trousers that sat at his actual waist. A shirt with sleeves that ended at his actual wrists. He stood in front of the small mirror above the desk and looked at himself for a moment. He looked like a person who belonged somewhere. A knock at the door preceded a young goblin carrying a breakfast tray, eggs, toast, something that might have been sausage but was better than any sausage he'd had before, and a pot of tea. The goblin set it on the desk without ceremony and left, and Harry sat down and ate all of it. He ate like someone who had spent years eating as fast as possible before someone came along with a reason to take the plate away, and then he caught himself, slowed down, and finished the last piece of toast at a deliberate, measured pace. He was done with the fast eating. He decided that now. While he ate, he read. Ragnarok had left him with 2 documents, a plain-language summary of Mordrak's clause and its legal implications, and a document titled Potter Estate, Overview of Holdings. He'd been aware, in a vague way, that his parents had left him something, that there was a vault. He had not known it was the 3rd largest estate in the British magical world. He had not known his family had a seat on the Wisengamot, the magical parliament, that had been occupied by a proxy for the last decade, casting votes in his name on things he'd never been consulted about. He read both documents twice. He drank 3 cups of tea. By the time he'd finished, the quality of the light from the corridor outside had shifted, the blue-white lamp cycling through something closer to midday, and a knock at the door announced a different goblin, this one older, with a face like geography, all ridges and worn-down edges. "Cursebreaker Bark Fong," the goblin said. "I've been assigned to your case. May I come in?" Yes, Harry said, and pushed the breakfast tray aside. Bark Fong came in and set a leather case on the desk, opening it to reveal tools that Harry didn't have names for yet, crystalline instruments and metal rods etched with runes and several small vials of something that glowed in a color between gold and amber. He moved around the room with the focused energy of someone who found problems genuinely interesting, which Harry appreciated. I need to explain what we're going to do, Bark Fong said, pulling a tall stool up to the desk and settling onto it. And I need you to understand it properly, because you'll experience some of it in ways that might be confusing without context. All right. The 67 constructs are not independent of each other. Several of the oldest ones, the ones placed earliest in your life, have had a decade to integrate with your magical core. When we remove them, you may experience the removal as a physical sensation. Sometimes an emotional one. He pulled one of the crystalline instruments from the case and held it up, turning it in the lamplight. Some of the emotional suppression enchantments, when they're lifted, will release the feelings they've been suppressing. Those feelings are yours. They've been there the entire time, just compressed. Think of it as opening something that has been sealed for a long time. Harry thought about pressure. About the thing in his chest that had been pushing since this morning. How bad? He asked. Different for everyone. I won't lie to you and say it's comfortable. But I will tell you that everything you experience will be real, your own responses, nothing artificially induced. We're removing interference, not adding it. Bark Fong set the crystal down and looked at him directly. You should also know that when the glamour suppression is lifted, there will be a visible change in your magical aura. Nothing alarming. It simply means that when you walk into a room, people will have a harder time not noticing you. Harry raised an eyebrow. I've spent my whole life being invisible. I know, Bark Fong said. That was the point of the glamour. There was a heavy quiet after that. Harry broke it first. When do we start? This afternoon. Today we do the diagnostic layer, map everything precisely before we touch any of it. Think of it like the difference between knowing there are 67 items on a shelf and knowing exactly how they're stacked and what holds each one up. Bark Fong was already reaching for his tools. Removal starts tomorrow morning, in order from least to most integrated. 3 days, maybe 4. And Ragnarok said it won't be comfortable. Ragnarok is professionally understated, Bark Fong said, not unkindly. It will be manageable. You will manage it. That much I can tell already. Harry looked at him. From what? From the fact that you read both your documents in full, made notes in the margin of the estate overview, and ate everything on your breakfast plate. Bark Fong picked up a metal rod and began to calibrate it against one of the glowing vials with practiced precision. You respond to information by processing it and acting on it. That is a useful quality in someone about to have their magical core restructured. Harry picked up his pen and pulled the estate overview back toward him. What should I know about the Wisengamot votes? He asked. The proxy casting them in my name, who is it? Bark Fong paused his calibration. Looked at Harry. Looked at the rod in his hands. I'll have someone bring you the full voting record, he said. Harry underlined the word proxy in the margin of his document and wrote a question mark next to it. Thank you, he said. Outside in the corridors of Gringotts, the business of the day went on, the distant sound of carts on rails, the murmur of transactions, the deep, ancient sound of the bank functioning as it always had. Harry sat at the desk in his borrowed room with his pen in his hand and his tin box beside him, reading documents and making notes in the margins, and the day moved around him without him being afraid of it. That, more than anything, was what felt new. Not the clothes that fit. Not the breakfast. Not the name Mordrak's claws or the weight of the Potter estate or even the list of 67 spells. What felt new was sitting in a room where no one was going to come through the door with a reason for him to make himself smaller, and the particular quality of attention he could give to a document when he wasn't also listening for footsteps. He could think, here. Fully, completely, without a part of his mind running constant threat assessment. He thought about 38 spells and the name Albus Dumbledore. He thought about what the word loyalty compulsion meant when it was cast on an infant. He thought about the Wizengamot voting record and the proxy and the question mark in the margin. He thought about the fact that somewhere above him, the Ministry of Magic had been formally notified that Gringotts Bank had invoked Mordrak's clause, and that they didn't know yet what that meant for them. He thought he would very much like to be in the room when they found out. He picked up his pen and wrote at the top of a fresh sheet of paper, "What I know. What I need to know. What I'm going to do about it." He drew a line down the middle of the page. He started filling in the left column. 3 floors above Harry's room, in a chamber that Gringotts reserved for communications of legal significance, Ragnar stood over a table covered in documents and looked at the man across from him with the expression he reserved for situations that were simultaneously gratifying and deeply, deeply enraging. The man was a Ministry Owl courier, not the man himself. The man himself was, of course, far too important to come in person when his institution had been sent notification of a Mordrak invocation. He had sent a courier instead, which was itself an answer of sorts. The courier held out a response scroll, sealed in ministry purple with the wax embossed with the crest of the minister's office. Ragnar took it, broke the seal, and read it. It was 4 sentences. The Ministry of Magic acknowledged receipt of Gringotts' notification. The Ministry of Magic wished to assure Gringotts that these matters were under review. The Ministry of Magic was confident that a satisfactory resolution could be reached through dialogue. The Ministry of Magic requested that Gringotts refrain from taking further action until a formal meeting could be arranged at the minister's earliest convenience. Ragnar put the letter down. He looked at the courier, who was doing his very best to maintain a professional neutrality that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Tell the minister," Ragnar said, in the tone of a man who is choosing each word for maximum precision, that Gringotts does not refrain. "We have already filed with the ICW. We are already removing 67 illegal magical constructs from our client's person. We are already building the legal case." He folded the ministry letter in half and handed it back to the courier. "If the minister would like to have a meeting, he is welcome to come here. We do not go to him. Not for this." The courier took the letter and left quickly. Ragnar looked at the table of documents. His senior legal director, a goblin named Sharpax who had been practicing international magical law for 90 years, was watching him from the corner of the room with a quill ready. "Send the ICW filing," Ragnar said. "Priority channel. And get me the full list of Wizengamot proxy votes cast by Dumbledore in Potter's name in the last decade. I want to know what he's been deciding on behalf of an 11-year-old boy who didn't know he existed." "Already compiling it," Sharpax said. "Good." Ragnar looked at the papers on the table one more time. "And get me the case file on Sirius Black." Sharpax looked up from his quill. "The Azkaban prisoner? The one who was named in Harry Potter's parents' will as his guardian," Ragnar said. "The one who has been in Azkaban for 10 years without a trial?" "Yes. That one." Sharpax was quiet for exactly 1 moment. Then he said, "I'll have it on your desk within the hour." Ragnar nodded and began gathering the files from the table, stacking them with the efficient finality of someone who is not requesting anything from the universe but simply informing it of what is about to happen. 67 spells. 10 years of a boy in a cupboard. A proxy making votes in his name. A godfather in prison without trial. He had invoked Mordrak's clause for legal and contractual reasons, and that was true. But Ragnar was also old enough to remember when goblins had been kept in the margins of magical society by the same wizards who smiled at their counters on Monday and signed legislation diminishing goblin rights on Tuesday, and he had spent 90 years making Gringotts into something that could not be marginalized without consequence. What had been done to Harry Potter was not, in the final accounting, so different. He carried the files to his office and set them on his desk and sat down and got to work. The diagnostic session that afternoon lasted 3 hours. Barkfong worked in near silence, passing instruments over Harry's hands and arms and through the air around his head, occasionally pausing to make notes on his own parchment in a flowing script Harry couldn't read. Harry sat on the edge of the bed and held still, which he was good at. The instruments registered different things at different moments. Twice, a crystal rod began to glow red and emit a faint, low tone, and Bark Fong would stop and make a longer notation, his expression the concentrated frown of a craftsman finding unexpected complications in a piece he thought he knew. Once, something Harry couldn't see passed through the air near his left shoulder and he felt it the way you feel static electricity before a lightning strike, a full body, galvanizing awareness, and Bark Fong said, very quietly, "That one's deep. We'll do that one last." "Which is it?" Harry asked. Bark Fong checked his list. Loyalty compulsion. Keyed to sacrifice for the greater good. A pause. Placed in October 1981. The same month his parents died. He put it on a baby, Harry said. Yes. They didn't say anything else about it. Bark Fong finished his diagnostic and packed his tools, and told Harry to sleep if he could and that they'd begin removal at 9 the next morning. Harry said thank you, and Bark Fong said it was his job, and left. Harry lay on the bed with the blanket pulled up and stared at the stone ceiling and listened to the deep, quiet heartbeat of the bank around him. He thought about October 1981. He thought, Dumbledore was there when my parents died. He placed a loyalty compulsion on their infant son the same month. He put me with people who didn't want me. He's been tracking me for 10 years. He controls the Wisengamot proxy vote in my name. He thought, he knows exactly what he's doing. He thought, so do I, now. He closed his eyes. He didn't expect to sleep, but he did, quickly and deeply, the way he rarely managed at Privet Drive, with the particular quality of rest that comes from sleeping somewhere that doesn't require you to stay half alert. In the morning, they would begin removing the chains. He wanted to be rested for it. Outside, somewhere in the city above, the sun was going down over London. And in an office in Whitehall that had no plaque on the door, the Ministry of Magic was having the worst Tuesday morning it had experienced in 40 years, reading a Gringotts filing notice stamped with the Mordrak seal, and trying to figure out what, exactly, it could do about it. The answer, which they would spend the next several days discovering, was, not very much. Chapter 2, The Weight of Chains. The first emotional suppression enchantment came off at 2:43 p.m., and Harry gripped the armrests and breathed. It wasn't like the tracking spells. It wasn't a pulling sensation or a fishhook behind the eyes. It was like a dam breaking in slow motion, not a flood, not an overwhelming rush, but a steady, inexorable pressure of water finding the cracks and pushing through, and behind it was 10 years of compressed feeling that had been sitting in a sealed container underneath everything he thought he was. He didn't cry. He was aware of the possibility, felt it as a physical pressure behind his eyes, but what came out instead was a sound, low, involuntary, the sound of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has just put it down. His hands were white on the armrests. Flintlock and Seer were very still. Bark Fong said nothing, which was the right thing to do. After about 90 seconds, it leveled out. Not stopped, it would be days before the full release was complete, but settled into something Harry could hold and look at. He took stock of what had arrived. Anger, primarily. Not the hot, volatile kind he might have expected, but something colder and more structural, more like the discovery of a fact than the experience of an emotion. He was angry about the cupboard. He was angry about the primary school where he'd worn Dudley's old uniforms and eaten lunch alone and understood from the behavior of the other children, who took their cues from Dudley, that there was something wrong with him, something that made him not worth sitting next to. He was angry about Aunt Petunia's voice, always thin and precise and designed to diminish. He was angry about 10 years of adequate but not quite food, of clothes that didn't fit, of not being given information about who he was and where he came from and why his parents were dead. He was angry about 38 spells and the name Albus Dumbledore. He sat with the anger and didn't perform anything, didn't compose his face or modulate his breathing for someone else's benefit. There was nobody in the room he needed to manage. That was a new experience. All right? Bark Fong asked, after a while. Yes, Harry said. And then, because it was accurate, I'm angry. That's appropriate, Bark Fong said, without inflection. I know. They took a break for 20 minutes. Harry walked the length of his room 6 times, not pacing anxiously but deliberately, moving in a straight line, turning, moving back, giving the anger somewhere to go. Then he sat back in the chair and said, "Ready." They did 2 more suppression enchantments that afternoon. Each one was different. The second released something more complicated, grief, mostly, for parents he had never known, mixed with the particular grief of a child who grew up knowing he was not wanted and having no framework to understand why. The third released something so simple it caught him off guard, ordinary, straightforward happiness at small things. The memory of a good meal. A day in primary school when the lesson had been about space and the teacher had talked about black holes and he'd felt that electric interest and it had lasted 20 minutes before the compulsion flattened it. 20 minutes. That was how long he'd been allowed to feel genuinely, uncomplicated happy at a time. 20 minutes, and then it had been pressed back down. He sat with that one quietly for a long while. That's enough for today, Bark Fong said. Harry looked up. There are still 47 remaining. And we'll reach all of them. But your core needs time to adjust between sessions, the integration points need to stabilize before we work on the adjacent constructs. Rushing this causes damage. Bark Fong was packing his instruments with care, each one wrapped in cloth and placed in a specific slot. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Harry nodded. He released the armrests and looked at his hands. The indentations from the armrests were visible across his palms, which was how hard he'd been gripping. He flexed his fingers slowly. Bark Fong, he said. The glamour suppression. The one that was making me smaller. When does that come off? Bark Fong paused with an instrument half-wrapped. Day 3, he said. It's integrated with several of the compulsion enchantments, we can't remove it safely until those are gone. What will I look like afterward? Bark Fong considered this with the precision of someone who didn't give imprecise answers. The physical component is limited, some adjustment to your natural coloring, likely, and your aura projection. But the more significant change is magical. Your core has been running at suppressed capacity for a decade. When the suppression lifts, he paused again. You'll be considerably more than you've been presenting as. Harry thought about this. How much more? We don't know yet, Bark Fong said, with what seemed like genuine interest. Your magical core is unusually dense, even suppressed. We haven't been able to take a proper reading because the suppression constructs are interfering with the instruments. He finished wrapping the last instrument. Frankly, Mr. Potter, our curse breakers have a professional interest in what your core looks like when it's functioning without interference. You may be something quite remarkable. Harry picked up his book from the desk. I'll settle for functional, he said. Bark Fong made the sound again that wasn't quite a smile. Of course you will, he said, and left. Ragnarok came to see him that evening, just after dinner, which was roast chicken and potatoes and something green that Harry ate even though he'd always assumed he didn't like vegetables because at Privet Drive they were always overcooked to the consistency of wet paper, and it turned out he'd simply never had properly cooked vegetables before. Ragnarok came in, looked at the clean plate, and sat down on the stool Bark Fong had left without asking if it was all right to sit. Harry appreciated that, too. The not asking. The treating him like a person who was present and capable rather than a fragile thing to be managed. How did today's session go? Ragnarok said. 19 down, Harry said. We'll be faster tomorrow, Bark Fong said. The outer layers are clear enough now that we can do the next tier in sequence. I wasn't asking about the technical progress. Harry looked at him. I'm angry, he said, the same way he'd said it to Bark Fong, as a fact, not a complaint. Getting angrier as more of them come off. That seems about right. It is, Ragnar said. Use it productively. There's no shortage of things to direct it at. I know. Harry set down his fork. Tell me about the ICW filing. Ragnar reached into his jacket. He had changed from the morning's uniform to something less formal but no less precise, and produced a document. Filed this morning, Priority Channel. The ICW has a 48-hour acknowledgement protocol for Mordrak filings. We expect a response by tomorrow evening. And the Ministry? Sent a response asking us to stop. We declined. The flatness in Ragnar's voice on this point was so absolute it was almost funny. What are they doing? Actually doing? Ragnar considered. They're in a contained panic. Cornelius Fudge, the minister, has convened an emergency meeting of his senior advisors. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement has been briefed. And Dumbledore, we believe, has been informed, though we are not certain through what channel. Harry absorbed this. What does Dumbledore do when he's been informed? He will, almost certainly, attempt to reach you directly. Can he? Not while you are within Gringotts' formal protection, Ragnar said. Our wards here are not ministry wards. He has no authority within this building. No one enters or sends communication to you without our approval while Mordrak's clause is active. Harry nodded slowly. He thought about Dumbledore learning that his 38 spells had been found and catalogued. He tried to imagine what that looked like from the other side, from the position of a man who had been running a very long, very elaborate plan, suddenly discovering that the central piece of that plan was sitting in Gringotts reading legal documents and making notes in the margins. He'll want to explain, Harry said. Ragnar looked at him sharply. He'll have a reason, Harry continued. For all of it. He'll have a framework that makes sense of everything, the tracking spells, the compulsions, the loyalty enchantments. He'll have a war to point to, or a prophecy, or some greater good. He'll have an explanation that almost makes sense if you don't look at it too hard. Harry paused. He's been doing this for decades. He doesn't think he's the villain. Ragnar was looking at him with that amber intensity. You've arrived at that conclusion very quickly for someone who met him this morning. I haven't met him at all, Harry said. But I know the pattern. I've been managed by experts. He tapped the edge of his fork against the plate once, absently. The Dursleys managed me with fear and deprivation. Dumbledore managed me with architecture, building the whole environment, the conditions, the expectations, so that I'd arrive at Hogwarts exactly the way he wanted me. Grateful, obedient, and ready to die for whatever he needed. The room was very quiet. That last compulsion, Harry said. Loyalty to sacrifice for the greater good. Placed the month my parents died. He was planning it from the beginning. Yes, Ragnar said. He didn't soften it or frame it differently, and Harry was grateful for that. I want to know about the prophecy, Harry said. If there is one. I want to know everything that exists in the official record about why my parents died and what role Dumbledore played in it. Can your legal team pull that? Some of it is sealed by the Ministry, Ragnar said. But sealed Ministry records are significantly less secure than sealed Gringotts records, and we have 40 years of goodwill with certain ICW archivists. He stood. I'll have what we can access on your desk by morning. Thank you. Ragnar paused at the door. Mr. Potter. The anger is appropriate and useful. Don't let it become the only thing. He said it without condescension, more the way a general briefs a tactician. You are going to need clear thinking as well. I know, Harry said. I'm not planning to burn anything down. No, Ragnar said, and the fractional tension release around his eyes was more pronounced than it had been the day before. You're planning something considerably more lasting. He left, and Harry pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him and uncapped his pen. The second day's session began at 9 and ran without a break until 1 in the afternoon. They cleared 11 more spells in the morning, the remaining tracking enchantments, 2 more memory dampeners, and the first of the loyalty compulsions. The loyalty compulsion was the most disorienting removal yet, not because it was painful but because of what it left behind, a kind of open space where a very specific gravitational pull had been. The one they removed first was keyed to Hogwarts and its authority structures, and afterward Harry sat with the novel experience of thinking about Hogwarts as simply a school he might choose to attend, rather than a destination toward which some deep part of him had always been inexorably tilted. He could choose not to go. He sat with that thought and turned it over and felt the edges of it. He would probably still go. But the choosing was different. Flintlock left to recalibrate after the morning session, and Sear stayed behind checking readings while Bark Fong made notes. Harry was stretching his arms over his head, working out the tension from 2 hours of gripping the armrests, when the door opened and a goblin he didn't recognize came in and said, "The ICW acknowledgement has arrived." Harry's arms came down. "What does it say?" "Director Ragnarok asked me to bring you to him." Harry followed the goblin through corridors he was starting to learn, left at the third lamp junction, right at the carved marker that looked like a stylized axe, down a half-level on stairs cut directly into the stone, to Ragnarok's working chamber. Ragnarok was at his table with Sharpax and 2 other goblins Harry hadn't met, and the table was covered in more paper than yesterday, which was saying something. "Sit," Ragnarok said, without looking up. Harry sat. He looked at the document in the middle of the table, a heavy parchment with a seal he recognized from his legal history reading as the ICW's formal emblem, a circle of 13 magical creatures surrounding a globe. "The ICW has acknowledged our filing and assigned it Priority 1 status," Ragnarok said, finally looking up. "This is significant. Priority 1 means they accept our characterization of the events as a potential violation of the Magical Persons Protection Charter." Sharpax leaned forward. "In practical terms, it means the ICW has opened its own investigation parallel to ours. They will want to interview you, Mr. Potter. Not now, after the removal is complete and you have had time to stabilize. But they will want a formal statement." "Fine," Harry said. "What does Priority 1 mean for the Ministry of Magic?" A brief, charged pause moved around the table. Sharpax and Ragnarok exchanged a glance of the kind that holds a very specific kind of professional satisfaction. "It means," Ragnarok said, "that the Ministry is now under ICW review. They cannot move against Gringotts, cannot attempt to reclaim you, and cannot interfere with our investigation without triggering an international incident. Fudge sent 3 owls this morning. We have responded to none of them." 3 owls, Harry said. "Escalating or conciliatory?" Ragnarok looked at him with what Harry was beginning to identify as a particular quality of attention, the kind that meant he'd said something unexpected and it had been registered. The first was conciliatory. The second was firm. The third, he picked up one of the scrolls. The third suggests that our actions are in danger of destabilizing the magical community and asks us, in effect, to consider the harm we are causing. Harry leaned his elbows on the table. "The harm Gringotts is causing?" "Yes. Not the 67 spells. The Ministry's position appears to be that the spells were a private matter which Gringotts has unnecessarily elevated to international attention." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, what was Fudge's position on the war? Against Voldemort. What did the Ministry do during it? Sharpax answered. Denied it was happening for as long as possible, then panicked, then credited Dumbledore with ending it. Fudge became minister partly on a platform of post-war stability and normalization. He has built his entire tenure around the idea that the dark period is over and the system works. And now the system's problem is sitting in Gringotts asking inconvenient questions, Harry said. In essence. Harry sat back. Keep ignoring the owls, he said. Don't antagonize, just don't respond. Let the ICW be the thing they have to deal with. He paused. And I want a copy of every vote the proxy cast in my name on the Wizengamot. Every single one. I want to know what I've been deciding without knowing about it. Sharpax produced a document from the stack on the table and slid it across to Harry. 48 pages of voting records, neat columns of dates and motions and the notation Potter, H.J., represented by proxy, APWB Dumbledore. Harry looked at the first page. His eyes went to a vote from 1989. Motion 7741, extension of emergency powers to the headmaster of Hogwarts in matters of magical security. Result, passed, 34-19. Potter, H.J., 4. He'd been 9 years old in 1989. He looked at 2 more entries, then set the document aside, carefully, the way he set things aside when he needed to think about them without reacting to them in front of other people, and said, "What's the status on Sirius Black?" This time the pause around the table was different. Less professional satisfaction, more the silence of people approaching something complicated. "We have the case file," Ragnarok said. He produced it from the stack, a thicker document than the voting record, bound with black cord, and what Harry was learning was Gringotts' notation for urgent. Sirius Black was named as your primary guardian in your parents' will. The will is a Gringotts document, we hold the original. "I know," Harry said. "I read the estate overview. What you may not know is that Sirius Black was arrested 3 days after your parents' deaths, on November 1, 1981, and imprisoned in Azkaban. Without trial." The room was very still. "Without trial," Harry repeated. "Without any formal hearing. No charges were filed through the Wizengamot. No evidence was presented before a judicial body. He was taken directly from the scene of an incident involving Peter Pettigrew, who was also supposed to be your parents' secret keeper, and who was reported dead, to Azkaban, by Aurors acting on verbal orders from the then head of magical law enforcement." "Who was?" Sharpax said, quietly, "Bartemius Crouch Sr." Harry had read enough in the last day and a half to know that name. It was on the Wizengamot voting record, on several of the ministry documents, a name that came up whenever the war period intersected with legal procedure. "He imprisoned a man without trial," Harry said. "He imprisoned your godfather without trial," Ragnarok said. "Which is a distinction that matters, because your godfather is named in a will that is a Gringotts legal document as having rights over your person and estate. An unlawful imprisonment of a Gringotts document named guardian is something we have legal standing to challenge." Harry looked at the black cord document. "He's been in Azkaban for 10 years. "Yes." "What does Azkaban do to a person?" Nobody in the room answered immediately, which was itself an answer. Sharpax finally said, carefully, "The Dementors that guard Azkaban feed on positive memories and emotions. A decade of that exposure, the medical literature is not optimistic." Harry was quiet for a long time. He thought about Sirius Black, who had been 21 or 22 when he'd been put in Azkaban, who had known his parents, who had been named their choice for his guardianship, who had been sitting in a cell for 10 years while Harry was in a cupboard on Privet Drive because nobody had checked a will. Nobody had checked a will. "I want him out," Harry said. "We are building the case," Sharpax said. "But the legal process requires—" "I understand the process," Harry said. "I want to know how fast it can move. What's the shortest realistic timeline from where we are to Sirius Black in front of a judicial body?" Sharpax exchanged a look with Ragnarok. "If we can get the case before Amelia Bones at the DMLE, she's the current head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and she is," he chose his words, "someone who takes procedural correctness seriously. If she sees the evidence, she cannot in good conscience ignore it. A hearing could be arranged within weeks." "Weeks," Harry said. "The justice system has considerable, he's been there 10 years, Harry said. "I understand weeks is fast. I'm not criticizing. I'm just—" He looked down at the table. 10 years. "Yes," Ragnarok said, and something in his voice was different, still precise, still measured, but with an undercurrent that Harry recognized as genuine anger held under governance. "We are aware." Harry nodded. He picked up the black cord document. "May I keep this?" "It's yours," Ragnarok said. Harry took it back to his room and read it cover to cover before Bark Fong arrived for the afternoon session, and by the time he'd finished reading he had 11 pages of notes and a very clear sense of what the next several weeks needed to look like. The afternoon session was the hardest yet. The second and third loyalty compulsions came off in sequence, the one keyed to authority as represented by magical institutions, and the one keyed to the concept of self-abnegation, of putting others before himself to the point of erasure. Bark Fong had explained, before they started, that these two were more integrated than the previous day's work, threaded into Harry's core at a deeper level, and that the removal would be more intense. He was not wrong. The authority compulsion released and Harry sat very still in the chair and breathed through the sensation of a door slamming open in his chest, not metaphorically, that was precisely what it felt like, a door that had been locked for a decade suddenly gone, and on the other side of it was a version of himself that looked at authority structures and felt, at the deep gut level, no particular obligation to defer to them. Not hostility, not rebellion. Just clarity. He would defer when deference was earned and not otherwise, and he would know the difference, and no planted enchantment would muddy that judgment. The self-abnegation compulsion was worse. Flintlock and Seer both took a step forward when Bark Fong removed it, some professional reflex, because Harry made a sound that wasn't anything like the previous sounds. It was short and involuntary and came from somewhere close to his sternum, and it was, if he was being exact about it, the sound of a person realizing for the first time with full emotional force that they were allowed to exist. Not as a function. Not as a piece in someone else's plan. Just as a person with a life that belonged to them. He gripped the armrest so hard the wood creaked. Bark Fong waited. After 3 minutes, Harry's hands relaxed. He let out a long, slow breath. His eyes were dry. He felt scraped clean, like a wall that's had old paint stripped back to the original surface. One more today, Bark Fong said, and it was a question as much as a statement. Yes, Harry said. One more. The last one of the day was a tracking spell, the simplest category, and it came off clean and easy and Harry barely felt it, which was almost funny after what had come before. Bark Fong packed his instruments and told Harry to eat dinner and rest and drink water, and Harry sat in the chair after he left and looked at the ceiling and did a quiet inventory of himself. He felt more than he had yesterday. He felt more than he had ever consciously felt, possibly, because the feelings that were there now had always been there, they'd just been behind a wall, and now the wall was mostly down. He felt the anger, cleaner and more directed than before. He felt something warm toward Bark Fong and Ragnarok that he was tentatively identifying as gratitude without any of the anxiety that gratitude usually came packaged in, the fear that it would be used as leverage, that warmth was a transaction with a bill attached. He felt, for the first time in his life that he could identify, genuinely curious about what happened next. Not scared of it. Curious. He showered and ate dinner and read for an hour and then took the serious black case file to bed and read it again with a pen in his hand, marking the places where the procedural failures were most visible, most provable, most inexcusable. By 10 o'clock he had a strategy outline sketched on a notepad. By 11 he was asleep, and this time he dreamed, not well, not easily, but in the way you dream when your mind is actually processing something, working through it, the images complicated and layered and real in the way suppressed dreams become when the suppression is lifted. He dreamed about a green light. He dreamed about a woman's voice saying not Harry, please, not Harry. He dreamed about a man laughing. He woke at 7 and lay still for a moment and felt all of it, the grief and the anger and the particular quality of a loss you've been protected from feeling fully, and let it exist without pressing it flat. Then he got up and dressed and ate breakfast and picked up his pen. Day 3 started with the glamour suppression, because Bark Fong arrived at 9 and said, the adjacent compulsions are clear. We can do the glamour now, with the tone of a craftsman presenting a particularly interesting problem. How long? Harry asked. The removal itself is about 40 seconds. The adjustment takes longer. Harry sat in the chair. What do I need to do? Nothing, Bark Fong said. Just stay still. And, a pause. Don't be alarmed by what you see. In the mirror. In the room. Harry sat still. Bark Fong removed the glamour suppression in 40 seconds, exactly as he'd estimated, and the sensation was unlike any of the others, not a pulling or a pressure or a release but an expansion, like taking a full breath after years of breathing shallowly, his own magical aura suddenly filling the space around him the way it had always been meant to, the way it had been present but muted for a decade. The 3 instruments in the room all registered it simultaneously. Flintlock said something sharp in gobbledygook that might have been a profanity. Seer took 2 quick steps back and then stopped herself, clearly applying professional discipline. Bark Fong stood very still for a moment. Harry looked at the mirror above the desk. His eyes had always been green, that hadn't changed. But the quality of the green was different now, brighter and more precise, catching the lamplight in a way that was just slightly more than ordinary. His face was the same face, thinner than it should have been from years of inadequate food, the scar still white and lightning-shaped on his forehead. But there was something different about how he occupied the room, a presence, a weight, like the air had recalibrated itself around him. "Well," Flintlock said, in a strangled voice. Bark Fong was checking his instruments. His expression was the most animated Harry had seen it. "Your ambient aura projection is," he checked again, as though not trusting the first reading. "Mr. Potter, I've been a Gringotts cursebreaker for 62 years. Your core output, fully suppressed as it still partially is in the top percentile of any individual I've assessed." Harry looked at his hands. They looked the same as they always had. But when he flexed his fingers, he could feel something there, not like static, not like electricity exactly, but a deep, alive awareness of his own magic, present and responsive in a way that felt like a muscle he'd always had but never been allowed to use. "The last of the compulsions," Harry said. "And the sacrifice enchantment." "When?" "This afternoon," Bark Fong said, checking his notes. 7 remaining. We'll clear most of them today." Harry nodded and stood up from the chair, and the junior cursebreakers both reflexively straightened when he rose, a physical response to the shift in the room, and Harry noticed it and filed it away without comment. He was not going to misuse it. But he was also not going to pretend it wasn't there. The afternoon session ran until 6 in the evening and left Harry sitting on the floor of his room with his back against the bed, because the chair had stopped feeling adequate halfway through and the floor was solid, and that was what he needed. 5 of the last 7 had come off without crisis. The 6th, the narrative control enchantment, the one that had made him more likely to accept given interpretations of events without question, released with a sensation like a static charge discharging across his whole body, and left him sitting in a sudden, crystalline silence in which he replayed every significant event of his childhood and saw it without the filter for the first time. Not dramatically. Just cleanly. Without the layer of "this is probably fine, this is probably normal, this is just how things are." It wasn't fine. It wasn't normal. It had never been either of those things. He sat with that. Let it be true. And then the last one came off, and the room went sideways. October 1981. Loyalty to sacrifice for the greater good. Placed on a 15-month-old. The deepest, oldest construct on the list, the one that had been integrated for a decade, threaded through his core like mortar between bricks. Bark Fong removed it carefully, took 11 minutes where the others had taken seconds, and the whole time Harry felt it unwinding the way a very old knot unwinds, slowly, each loop releasing, the tension in the fiber enormous after years of being wound tight. When it finally came free there was a moment of complete, absolute silence in the room and in his body, and then something in the center of his chest went from compressed to open, and Harry felt, for the first time in his life, fully present in it without a single piece of himself being directed at anything other than his own existence. He slid off the chair and sat on the floor. Nobody tried to help him up. Bark Fong sat on the floor beside him, cross-legged, instruments in his lap, utterly matter-of-fact about it, and said nothing. They sat there for several minutes. "That's all of them," Bark Fong said finally. "I know," Harry said. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about it properly, the way he was learning to, without a compulsion smoothing the answer into something manageable for someone else. He felt enormous. He felt like himself, which was both more and less comfortable than feeling like nothing, and he was going to need time to understand the dimensions of it. He felt the anger, clean and purposeful. He felt the grief, honest and present. He felt something he was tentatively naming as readiness, pointed at the future like a compass finding north. "Like I know what I'm doing," he said. Bark Fong looked at him sideways. "Do you?" Harry looked at the far wall. He thought about 38 spells and a proxy vote. He thought about a man in Azkaban who had been there for 10 years without a trial. He thought about the Wisingamot records and the ICW filing and the Ministry's 3 increasingly frantic owls. He thought about Albus Dumbledore, somewhere above him in the city, constructing a narrative to explain all of this. "Yes," Harry said. He got up off the floor. His legs were steady. His magic was fully present in a way it had never been. He could feel it in his hands, in the air around him, responsive and enormous and entirely his. He washed his face. He ate dinner. He read through the notes he'd been building for 3 days, the strategy outline, the Sirius Black case, the Wisingamot voting record. Then he knocked on the wall and the pattern he'd worked out with the goblin on duty, which meant I need to speak to the director. Ragnarok was there in 12 minutes. He came in, looked at Harry, and stopped. Just for a moment, a beat of assessment that was more than professional. He looked at him the way Flintlock had looked at the instrument readings, with the quiet recognition of something that had been expected but was still, somehow, more than anticipated. "It's done," Harry said. "I can see that," Ragnarok said. "I'm ready to talk about what comes next. Properly." Ragnarok sat down. He didn't bring documents this time. He looked at Harry with his amber eyes and said, "Tell me what you want." Harry sat across from him and leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and said, "I want Sirius Black free. I want the proxy vote dissolved and my Wisingamot seat returned to my direct control. I want the ICW investigation to have everything we found." He paused. "And I want Dumbledore in a room where I can ask him my questions and he has to answer them, without a ministry buffer and without the ability to manage the conversation." Ragnarok said nothing for a moment. "The first 3 are already in motion," he said. "The 4th requires more, I know," Harry said. "That one's last. But it's on the list." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Sharpax has the DMLE file on Sirius Black fully prepared. We have a contact inside the department, a senior Auror who owes Gringotts a significant professional debt. She can get the file in front of Amelia Bones by morning." "Do it tonight," Harry said. "It's 10 o'clock in the evening." "She'll read it tonight," Harry said. "If she's the kind of person who takes procedural correctness seriously, she'll read it the moment it arrives. People like that don't leave things for morning." Ragnarok looked at him for another moment. "You've never met Amelia Bones?" "No," Harry said. "But I've read 6 documents in the last 3 days that mention her by name, and every single mention is in the context of someone trying to work around her because she won't bend. That tells me everything I need to know." Ragnarok stood. He went to the door. He paused. "You are not what I expected," he said. It wasn't flattery, it was a fact, delivered plainly. "No," Harry said. "I'm what I would have been without 67 spells on me." Ragnarok left to send the file. Harry turned off the lamp and lay in the dark and listened to the deep, quiet heartbeat of Gringotts, and felt his own magic steady and present around him like a second skin, and thought about everything that was about to happen. He wasn't afraid of any of it. That was new. That was entirely, completely new. He let himself feel it, the not afraid, and held it the way you hold something you've been searching for a long time without knowing you were searching. Then he closed his eyes and slept, and this time he didn't dream about green light. Chapter 3, Mordrak's Claws. Amelia Bones read the file at 11:47 p.m. Her assistant had left it on her desk with a note that said Gringotts, urgent, via Auror Dawlish and had, wisely, not attempted to summarize it. Amelia had been working late. She often worked late, the DMLE being the kind of department that generated more paper after hours than during them, and she'd intended to leave the file for morning. She'd picked it up to move it to the morning stack, read the first 3 lines, and sat back down. She read it in one sitting, which took 40 minutes, and when she was done she set it on the desk and removed her monocle and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and sat very still. The office was quiet. The department beyond her door was quiet. The ministry building was quiet in the way large bureaucratic buildings are quiet at night, all the machinery of policy and procedure and political management stilled, just the building itself, the stone and the enchanted windows and the portraits who slept in their frames and occasionally snored. Amelia replaced her monocle and looked at the file again. Sirius Black. Named guardian in a Gringotts held will. Imprisoned November 1, 1981. No charges filed with the Wisengamot. No hearing. No evidence presented before any judicial body. Straight from the scene to Azkaban on verbal orders from Bartemius Crouch Sr. She opened her desk drawer and found a fresh sheet of parchment and a quill. She wrote 4 words at the top, "How did this happen?" Then she crossed it out, because it wasn't actually a question she needed a document to answer. She knew how it had happened. The war had been ending. Crouch had been running the DMLE with emergency powers that had been extended twice by a Wisengamot vote that, she now noted with a cold feeling in her stomach, had been cast in favor by a proxy, Potter, H.J., who had been 11 months old at the time. She wrote instead, "What can be done?" She answered her own question in 30 minutes of focused legal reasoning, the quill moving across the parchment in her precise, economical hand. It was not a simple answer. 10 years of imprisonment without trial created a legal complexity that several people in the ministry would prefer remain complex and unexplored. Crouch was no longer head of the DMLE, she was, but he was a senior ministry official with connections in every department, and challenging his actions from a decade ago would be interpreted by every political mind in the building as an attack on the established order. She noted this in her document and immediately wrote beside it, "Irrelevant." Then she wrote a list of names, the 6 Aurors who had been present at the original arrest. The clerk who had processed the Azkaban intake paperwork. The duty judge who should have flagged the absence of formal charges. She would speak to all of them. By the time she finished, it was past 1 in the morning. She gathered the Gringotts file and her own notes, locked them in the warded compartment in her desk that only she could open, put on her traveling cloak, and left the office. On her way out of the building, she passed the security desk and the night guard, a young man named Fletcher who was reading a Quidditch magazine and straightened guiltily when he heard her heels on the marble. She didn't comment on the magazine. She said, "If Minister Fudge's office sends anything to my department in the next 24 hours, hold it for my personal attention. Don't route it through the normal channels." Fletcher blinked. "Yes, ma'am." Amelia Bones walked out of the ministry into the London night and disapparated, and the night guard put down his magazine and stared at the empty lobby for a long moment, with the instinct of someone who has witnessed the early stages of something significant without being able to say exactly what. Harry didn't know about Amelia Bones' midnight reading session, not yet, but he knew enough to be unsurprised when Ragnarok came to his room at 8 the next morning with the expression of a man who has received good news that was anticipated and finds it satisfying in direct proportion to how precisely it was anticipated. "She's moving," Ragnarok said, without preamble. Harry set down his breakfast roll. "How fast?" "She's requested access to Gringotts within the hour. Formally, through the ICW liaison, which means she's not going through the ministry. She wants to see the original will and the signed caster documentation from our scan. She's building her own case," Harry said. "Parallel to ours. So she controls the legal narrative inside the ministry rather than us handing it to them." "Correct. Smart." Harry thought for a moment. "Does she want to see me?" "She has requested it." A pause. "You are not obligated. You are under Gringotts' protection and, I know. I want to see her." Harry picked up his breakfast roll again. Bring her in when she arrives. Brief her on what I know, not just the documents. Let her read the room. He paused. Is she going to try to manage me? Ragnar's expression did the thing Harry was learning to read, the amber eyes settling into a particular stillness that meant this is an interesting question and I am going to answer it honestly. She will try to be responsible, he said, finally. She is a woman who has spent her career working within a system that frequently frustrates her. She will want to do the right thing and she will also want to do it in a way that doesn't shatter the institutions she's given her life to. Harry nodded. I can work with that, he said. As long as she understands that some of the institutions are going to shatter regardless. He finished his breakfast. He dressed, the goblin-tailored clothes, which had been quietly augmented over the past 3 days with additional items, including a jacket that fit across the shoulders in a way he was still getting used to, and went to the small bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. He'd been doing this periodically since the glamour came off, not out of vanity but out of genuine interest, learning what he looked like without the filter, adjusting to the reality of the aura that was visible now even in his own reflection as a faint quality of presence, like light coming from somewhere close. He looked like someone you'd pay attention to. He was 11 years old. He found that interesting. Amelia Bones arrived at Gringotts at 8:43 in the morning, alone, which Harry noted when Ragnar told him. She hadn't brought assistants or a legal team or a buffer. She came in through the main entrance with her traveling cloak and her monocle and her document case and asked for the director, and when she was brought to the private meeting chamber she found Ragnar at the head of the table and Sharpax to one side and Harry Potter sitting at the table reading a legal document with a pen in his hand. She stopped for exactly 1 second. Harry looked up. Amelia Bones was a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with the bearing of someone who had never once been uncertain about whether she had the right to take up space in a room. She had iron-gray hair cut practically short and the kind of face that had probably always been more formidable than conventionally attractive, and she wore it without any apparent concern for the distinction. She looked at Harry with an expression that was carefully professional but in which he could read, underneath, something that was not professional at all, a sharp, unguarded recognition, the face of someone who has been reading about a child in a document for 40 minutes and is now confronted with the actual child. She sat down across from him and put her case on the table. Harry Potter, she said. Amelia Bones, Harry said. A brief pause. She looked at the document in his hands. What are you reading? He held it up so she could see the title. ICW Charter Provisions for Persons Protection, Historical Applications. Something moved in her expression. She set down her case and opened it and produced the Gringotts file, the original one, and laid it on the table. I read this last night, she said. I have questions. So do I, Harry said. You can go first. Another beat. This one had a quality he was learning to identify, the moment when an adult recalibrates, when they've arrived expecting to manage a child and find something else instead. The caster documentation, she said. Your curse breakers, how certain are they of the attribution? She glanced at Ragnar. 38 spells attributed to Albus Dumbledore, Harry said. She looked at him. Certain enough to file with the ICW at Priority 1, Ragnar said. Our methodology is not subject to challenge, it has been the evidentiary standard for international magical law for 300 years. Each spell carries a magical signature as unique as a fingerprint. We can prove every attribution in front of any judicial body in the world. Amelia said nothing for a moment. Then, he will argue that he had reason. That the war, I know, Harry said. She looked at him again. You're not surprised. No. I've had 3 days to think about it. He set down his pen. He'll argue necessity. He'll have a framework that almost makes sense. He had a war and a prophecy and a genuine belief that he was the only one who could see the whole board. Harry looked at the file between them on the table. None of that is a defense in law. None of it changes what was done. And none of it is what I'm most interested in right now. She leaned forward slightly. What are you most interested in? Sirius Black, Harry said. Amelia Bones was very still for a moment. Then she put both hands flat on the table, a deliberate gesture, the kind that meant I am going to be honest with you, and said, I know about Black. I've been pulling records since 2 this morning. You should know that what was done, the imprisonment without trial, was procedurally catastrophic. It should never have been possible. Crouch exploited the emergency powers that had been granted during the war to bypass the standard judicial process, and there was no institutional check on it because every institutional check was either compromised or overwhelmed. He's been there 10 years, Harry said. Because nobody checked. Because nobody checked, she said, and something in her voice was not administrative language anymore. I am going to fix that. I want you to understand that I am not going to use the political complexity of this situation as a reason to delay. I have already scheduled a preliminary hearing for 2 weeks from today. Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Sharpax. 2 weeks, Harry said. In a case of this magnitude, 2 weeks is fast. I know. He paused. Is there anything that could make it faster? Amelia looked at him with a very direct gaze. If I had a formal statement from you as his named ward, submitted through Gringotts as the originating institution, it would significantly strengthen the procedural argument for urgent remediation. I'll write it today, Harry said. I'll need Gringotts to certify it. We'll certify it, Ragnarok said. Amelia sat back. She looked at Harry for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not quite professional, not quite personal, something in between that had the quality of reappraisal. I need to ask you something, she said. And you can decline to answer. Go ahead. Dumbledore. She said it carefully, the way you say the name of something large. What do you want to happen? The room was very quiet. I want to talk to him, Harry said. On my terms. With a full record being kept. I want him to answer my questions, not give me a speech, not explain his position, not redirect to the greater good. Answer my specific questions. He held her gaze. After that, I want the ICW to do whatever the law says should happen. I'm not asking for a specific punishment. I'm asking for a process that isn't managed by anyone with an interest in protecting him. Amelia Bones looked at him for a long time. How old are you? She said. 11, Harry said. As of 3 days ago. She was quiet for another moment. Then she picked up her quill. I'll see what I can arrange, she said. No promises on the conversation. The legal process will move at its own pace regardless. She paused. And Mr. Potter, I would strongly advise that while you are under Gringotts' protection, you remain here. Not because you are in danger, exactly, but because the next few weeks are going to generate a significant amount of political turbulence, and the safest place for you to be is somewhere that has wall-to-wall legal standing and doesn't answer to the Minister of Magic. Harry smiled. It wasn't a child's smile, it was something more considered. I wasn't planning on going anywhere, he said. I have a lot of reading to do. The Ministry's fourth owl arrived while Amelia was still in the building, which Sharpax noted with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had excellent timing. This one wasn't from Fudge. It was from Dumbledore's office directly, addressed to Gringotts Bank, director's attention, sealed in Hogwarts dark red wax and signed in a hand that was, Harry had been told, recognizable to anyone who'd ever received a letter from the man. Ragnarok brought it to the meeting chamber and broke the seal in front of both Harry and Amelia Bones. He read it. He handed it to Sharpax. Sharpax read it and handed it to Harry. It was 2 pages. It began, "My dear Ragnarok," which Harry clocked immediately as a performance of warmth. It acknowledged that Gringotts had found something concerning during its scan of young Harry's person. It explained, with considerable elegance, that the measures in question had been taken during a period of extreme magical crisis, in consultation with parties who had since been unable to be reached, and with the singular goal of ensuring young Harry's survival long enough for the threat of Voldemort to be resolved. It expressed deep personal regret for any distress caused. It requested a meeting at the earliest opportunity. It was, Harry thought, genuinely well written. He could see how it could work, how, under different circumstances, the framework would land. I did it to save him. I had no choice. I'm sorry. There was warmth in it and something that looked like contrition, and if you didn't know what you were looking for, you might take the apology at face value. He read it once. He set it down. He's reframing, Harry said. The spells aren't illegal interference anymore, they're wartime necessity. He's not the architect of my management, he's the protector who had to make hard choices. He looked at Ragnarok. This letter is for a record. He wants documentation that he expressed regret and offered dialogue before anything legal happened. Yes, Ragnarok said. Don't respond yet, Harry said. Let the ICW filing sit for another day. Let him wonder what's in it. He paused. Then respond that Mr. Potter's guardian is handling all communications regarding his case, and that his guardian's legal representative is Gringotts. He'll know you read it, Amelia said. I know, Harry said. That's fine. Let him know I read it and understood it and made a strategic decision anyway. That's the most useful piece of information I can give him right now. He picked up his pen. It'll tell him who he's actually dealing with. Amelia looked at Harry with the expression she'd been developing across the meeting, the one that said she was continuously recalibrating and had given up pretending she wasn't. She made a note in her own document. Harry suspected it was less about the case and more about him, and that was fine too. 3 floors above the meeting chamber, in a section of Gringotts that Harry hadn't visited yet, a team of 6 cursebreakers was constructing the evidentiary file that would accompany Gringotts' submissions to the ICW. They had been working in shifts since the scan results came back, building a document that was less legal filing and more archaeological record, the full account of what had been found in Harry Potter's magical core, annotated, verified, cross-referenced against known magical signatures in Gringotts' extensive database of casters. The head of the team was a cursebreaker named Goldtooth who had been doing this work for 111 years and who was, by his own account, unbothered by most things. He had been bothered by this. He had said so, once, to Bark Fong, when they had compared notes on the morning of the second day, and Bark Fong had said I know, and they had gone back to work, because that was what you did when you were bothered, you worked, you documented, you made sure the record was complete and unimpeachable and would stand up to any challenge for the next 500 years. The document was now 412 pages long. It had 37 appendices. It had the kind of structural integrity that made legal scholars want to use it as a teaching example for how evidentiary submissions should look. Goldtooth signed off on the final page at 11 a.m. and sent it to Sharpak's desk. The ministry had its emergency meeting at 2 in the afternoon. Harry knew this because Ragnarok came to his room at 3 with the information, delivered in the manner of someone providing a useful intelligence update. Fudge convened a session with the senior Wisengamot members he trusts, Ragnarok said. He presented our filings as an overreach by a commercial institution that has misinterpreted its own charter. He suggested the 67 spells may have been placed by parties other than those identified. Did anyone believe him? Several wanted to. Several more are waiting to see which way the institutional wind blows. A pause. Dumbledore was present. Harry looked up from the document he'd been annotating. What did he say? He said very little. Which is, in my experience, what intelligent people do in meetings when they are rapidly assessing damage and have not yet determined their best response. Ragnarok sat down. He is not going to panic. He is going to think, and then he is going to act, and we should assume whatever action he takes will be elegant and will appear reasonable. I know, Harry said. What leverage does he actually have? Over the ICW? Considerable personal prestige. He has been the supreme mugwump, the ICW's chief representative from Britain, for decades. He has relationships with the heads of every major magical nation. He is not without influence. But he can't control the ICW the way he controls the Wisengamot. No. The ICW has its own structure, its own investigators, and its own judicial panel. His relationships will soften some edges. They won't stop the process. Harry nodded. He thought for a moment. He'll try to get to me before the ICW interview. Not through Gringotts, he knows that won't work. He'll try to find a sympathetic intermediary. Someone I might trust or respond to. Yes, Ragnarok said. Who would that be? Harry looked at the wall. It was a genuine question. Who in the magical world did he have any relationship with? His parents were dead. His godfather was in Azkaban. The Dursleys were not intermediaries, they were a footnote. He had no friends in the magical world because he had never been in it. He had no teachers, no mentors, no, he looked at Ragnarok. McGonagall, he said. Minerva McGonagall. She's Dumbledore's deputy at Hogwarts. She keeps a watch on magical children, there are references to her in the Hogwarts intake records Sharpax pulled. She visited Privet Drive once, when you were placed there, Ragnarok said. She observed for a day and expressed reservations. The record shows she sent Dumbledore 3 letters over the years about your welfare. He responded to none of them with substantive action. Harry was quiet for a moment. She doesn't agree with him. But she stays. She does. He'll use her. As the good faith outreach. Harry picked up his pen. She might come here genuinely, with her own concerns that aren't about his agenda. Or she might come here carrying his message because she believes in him enough to carry it. He paused. Or both, simultaneously. That's the complication. How do you want to handle it if she arrives? I'll see her, Harry said. But not alone, and with a full record. And I want to read Gringotts' file on the Hogwarts intake records first, everything they have on how my placement was decided, who was consulted, who was overruled. Ragnarok produced the file from his jacket like a conjurer, which was slightly startling. Harry suspected Ragnarok had been carrying it precisely because he'd anticipated this conversation. He set it on the desk. Read it before dinner, Ragnarok said. There's a section on page 14 you should pay particular attention to. He left. Harry opened the file to page 14. Page 14 contained a transcript of a meeting from September 1981, 6 weeks before Harry's parents died, in which Dumbledore had met with senior members of the Order of the Phoenix, his wartime intelligence group. The transcript had been obtained through ICW archival channels, which meant it was official record, not hearsay. In the transcript, Dumbledore discussed the prophecy, the one Harry had suspected existed. He didn't read it in full, not yet. Gringotts investigators had annotated this section to note that the full prophecy was held in a Ministry of Magic record vault and they were still working on access. But the summary in the meeting notes was enough. The child referred to in the prophecy must be prepared, Dumbledore was recorded as saying. Not simply protected, prepared. In the manner of someone who has been shaped, over time, to understand the nature of sacrifice. Harry read it twice. Then he read the next line, the magic required to defeat Voldemort permanently resides in the child's willingness to give his life. We cannot tell him this. We cannot allow him to arrive at the moment with the intellectual resources to choose differently. He put the document down and looked at his hands. There it was. Plainly stated, in 1981, in a meeting transcript that was now an ICW document. Cannot allow him to arrive at the moment with the intellectual resources to choose differently. The loyalty to sacrifice compulsion. The narrative control. The memory dampening. The emotional suppression. 38 spells, placed over a decade, designed to walk a boy toward a specific moment without giving him the means to think his way out of it. Harry felt the anger arrive in a clean, precise wave, not hot, not destructive, but clarifying, the way a beam of focused light clarifies what a scattered light obscures. He picked up his pen. He wrote, at the top of a fresh sheet, statement for ICW record, Harry James Potter. He started writing, and he wrote for 2 hours, and when he was done he had 14 pages in clear, precise prose, what had been done, the order in which the spells had been removed, what each one had suppressed, and what its suppression had meant for 10 years of his life. He wrote about the cupboard. He wrote about the schools. He wrote about the Wiesengemot proxy votes. He wrote about the September 1981 meeting transcript and what it said. He didn't write it dramatically. He didn't use loaded language or emotional appeals. He wrote it the way Amelia Bones wrote her notes, factual, specific, documented. It was the most devastating thing he'd ever produced, precisely because it wasn't trying to be. He called the goblin on duty and asked for Sharpax. Sharpax arrived in 7 minutes, read the 14 pages in 10, and said, in a voice that had acquired a particular quality of contained fury, "I'll have this certified and added to the ICW submission tonight." "One more thing," Harry said. "I want the formal petition for Sirius Black's hearing submitted with this same submission. I want the ICW to have it all at once." Sharpax nodded. "And I want Ragnarok to know that I'm ready to respond to Dumbledore's letter," Harry said. "Not through Gringotts. From me." He wrote the letter to Dumbledore at 8 in the evening, with Ragnarok present, not for oversight but because Harry had asked him to stay and Ragnarok had understood without explanation that this was about bearing witness. It was 1 page. It was not unkind. It was not performatively cold. It said, "Dear Professor Dumbledore, Gringotts has shared your letter with me. I read it carefully and I understand the framework you are presenting. I am not going to argue with it in writing, because arguments in writing become records that get managed, and I want our first conversation to be an actual conversation. I am available to speak with you. The conditions are, Gringotts bank on neutral ground, a full independent record kept by the ICW liaison, no third parties present who are not my legal representatives or yours. I will not bring anyone to speak for me except Ragnarok, if he chooses to attend. I am not angry in a way that makes me unreasonable. I am angry in a way that makes me clear. There is a difference. I have questions. They are specific. I would like you to answer them. After that, what happens is between the ICW and your conscience." Harry Potter. He sealed it with the Potter family seal, which Gringotts had found in the estate vault and returned to him that morning, and handed it to the courier. Ragnarok, who had read it over his shoulder without being invited to, and had been allowed to, said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "The part about being angry in a way that makes you clear." "Yes," Harry said. "He'll find that more alarming than any threat you could have made." "I know," Harry said. The response from Dumbledore arrived the next morning before breakfast. It was also 1 page. It was also careful. It accepted the conditions. It proposed the following Thursday. It said, "Near the end, I have looked forward, in many ways, to meeting you. I had hoped it would be under different circumstances. I find I must accept the circumstances that exist." Harry read it. He set it on the desk next to his tea. He ate his breakfast. Thursday, he said to Ragnarok, who had arrived simultaneously with the letter, with the timing that Harry was beginning to suspect was deliberate. "For days," Ragnarok said. "Enough time to finish reading the full estate records and the ICW case history." Harry picked up his cup. "And I want to know more about what Hogwarts actually teaches. Not the catalogue, the actual curriculum, what's included and what's left out." Ragnarok raised his brow, barely, a fractional shift, but Harry caught it. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to Hogwarts on my own terms, I need to know exactly what those terms should be." Harry looked at him. "I'm not boycotting it. I'm not burning it down. But I'm not walking in there as the same boy who would have arrived if none of this had happened." He set down his cup. "I want to understand what it is before I agree to anything." "That is," Ragnarok paused. "An unusually strategic position for an 11-year-old. I'm an unusually strategic 11-year-old, Harry said, without any particular pride in it. Just as a fact. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. There is something I should tell you, he said. Before Thursday. Harry waited. The ICW has formally notified 14 member nations of the Mordrak invocation and its findings. 7 of those nations have already submitted observer requests for the investigation. Ragnarok sat down across from him. What was done to you is not, it turns out, unique. Our filing triggered 3 separate requests from other nations for similar scans on magical children identified as persons of prophetic or political significance in their home countries. Harry was still. They've been doing this to others, he said. We don't know yet. The scans are pending. But the international community has been watching Dumbledore's influence for some time, and several nations have been looking for a procedural opening. Ragnarok looked at him steadily. You are not simply a case. You are a precedent. Harry looked at the window, at the enchanted view of the city above, painted in early morning light. He thought about being a piece on a board for a very long time, moved by other people's hands. He thought about the difference between being a piece and being a player. Good, he said. Then make sure the Thursday meeting is on the record for all 14 nations. Ragnarok said nothing. He simply took out his quill and made a note. McGonagall arrived on Wednesday morning. She came through the proper channels, old Gringotts formally identified herself, requested a meeting with Harry Potter at his convenience and with whatever representatives he chose to have present. She did not invoke Dumbledore's name. She did not claim authority. She came, as far as Harry could read, as herself. He received her in the meeting chamber with Ragnarok present, and the record being kept, and 2 cups of tea already on the table when she arrived. Minerva McGonagall was exactly what the Hogwarts records had described and something more, tall, precise, wearing robes that were elegantly plain, with a face that had spent decades managing the expression of someone who feels more than they intend to show. She came in and looked at Harry and stopped, the same way Amelia Bones had stopped, but with a different quality to it, more private, more internal, like something landing in a place she'd been keeping clear without knowing why. She sat down. She took the tea. You look like your father, she said. Around the jaw. But your mother's eyes. I know, Harry said. I've seen the photographs. She wrapped her hands around the teacup. How are you? Better than I was a week ago, Harry said. Considerably. She looked at the table, then at Ragnarok, then back at Harry. I came because, she stopped. Started again. I want you to know that I wrote to Dumbledore 3 times. About your living situation. He told me you were safe. I know, Harry said. Gringotts has the correspondence. She flinched. Barely. I should have done more, she said. Yes, Harry said, not unkindly. But that's a conversation for after Thursday. I'm not here to assign blame to everyone who made the wrong call in the same general direction. That's not a productive use of time. He looked at her. Why are you actually here? Not what you told Gringotts. What brought you through the door today? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, he asked me to come. There it was. He asked you to speak to me before Thursday, Harry said. He asked me to, she paused. He didn't give me a script. He asked me to speak to you. To convey that he regrets, Professor McGonagall, Harry said. What do you think? About what he did? Silence. It was a long, charged silence. Ragnarok sat very still at the other end of the table. The record quill scratched. I think, McGonagall said, slowly, that Albus Dumbledore is the most gifted wizard I have ever known and one of the most genuinely good people I have ever known, and I think, she stopped. And, Harry said quietly. And I think that he made a decision about your life before you could speak, and he has been making decisions about your life every year since, and he has done it because he believes with every part of his considerable intelligence that he was right to do so. She looked at her tea. And I am no longer certain that being right is the same thing as having the right. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's an honest answer, he said. It's the only kind I know how to give. Harry looked at her. He looked at her for long enough that she met his eyes fully, and he read in her face something he recognized, the particular quality of someone standing at the edge of a decision they've been avoiding, who has been given by an external event the context they needed to make it. Come on Thursday, he said. Not as his intermediary. As yourself. As someone who has taught at Hogwarts for 30 years and has had reservations and has a right to be in the room. He paused. I'd like someone there who knew my parents. McGonagall looked at him with an expression that was no longer managing itself. Yes, she said. All right. She finished her tea and left, and the meeting chamber was quiet, and Ragnock said from the far end of the table, that was not what I expected. She's not working for him, Harry said. She came because he asked and she thought it was the right thing to do, and then she sat down and answered honestly when pushed, because that's who she is. He picked up his own tea. Those are the people who change direction. Not because you convince them, because you give them room to be what they already are. Ragnock made no note on his parchment. He simply looked at Harry Potter, 11 years old, with 67 spells removed and 3 days until the meeting that would change the shape of the British magical world. Thursday, Ragnock said. Thursday, Harry agreed. Outside in the corridor, the deep heartbeat of the bank continued, carts and commerce and 1,000 years of accumulated standing, and the record quill scratched the last line of the Wednesday meeting into the official transcript and stopped. Chapter 4, The Prisoner and the Heir. Thursday came with the quality of a day that knows it's significant. Harry was up at 6, not from anxiety but from the simple fact that his mind was already running at full speed before he'd properly opened his eyes, processing the architecture of the morning ahead the way it had been processing everything since the spell removal, fully, without dampening, with a clarity that still caught him off guard in its intensity. He lay in the dark for a few minutes and let the thoughts run, then got up and dressed and went to the small desk and read through his notes one final time. Not to memorize them. He'd already done that. He read them the way an athlete goes through warm-up movements, not because they've forgotten how to run, but because the body needs to know it's ready. He ate breakfast alone, which he'd come to appreciate as a daily ritual. The food was always good and the silence was always real and he could think without managing anyone. He ate everything on the plate and drank 2 cups of tea and watched the enchanted window shift through the early morning colors of the city above. At 7:30, Ragnock came in without knocking and sat down across from him and said, Dumbledore has confirmed. He'll arrive at 9 with his own legal representative, a ministry solicitor named Clearwater, senior partner of a firm that handles most of the Hogwarts trust work. Political, Harry said. Very. The choice signals that he intends this to be a conversation with legal stakes but not adversarial ones. He's presenting himself as a party coming in good faith to resolve a misunderstanding. What about the ICW observer? Senior investigator Marchand from the French delegation. She arrived last night. She's reviewed our full evidentiary submission and she is, Ragnock paused. Not sympathetic to Dumbledore's position. Good. Harry set down his cup. And McGonagall? Already in the building. She arrived at 7. A slight pause. She brought a tin of shortbread for you. She left it at the front desk. Harry absorbed this. Did she? She did. It's Scottish shortbread, if that's relevant. Harry decided it was relevant in the way small human gestures are relevant, not strategically, just genuinely. He made a note to thank her. One more thing, Ragnock said. He reached into his jacket and placed a small, flat leather case on the table. The Potter family signet ring. It was in the vault. You don't have to wear it today, but it exists, and you should know it's yours. Harry opened the case. The ring was gold, older than anything he'd ever owned, with the Potter family crest, a stag and a set of scales, engraved on the face. He looked at it for a moment. He put it on his right hand. It fit. Ragnarok looked at it on his finger and said nothing. He didn't need to. The meeting chamber for Thursday had been arranged differently from the working sessions of the past week. The long stone table was the same, but it had been cleared of the accumulated debris of documents and instrument cases, and there were 7 chairs arranged with a precision that communicated the balance of parties without making it theatrical. Harry sat in the middle of one side, with Ragnarok to his right and Sharpax to his left. Across the table was a chair for Dumbledore and his solicitor. At the head of the table was ICW Investigator Marchand's chair, and at the foot, at Harry's invitation, which Ragnarok had raised an eyebrow at and then said nothing more about, was a chair for McGonagall. Investigator Marchand was already present when Harry arrived. She was a small woman in her 60s with the posture of someone who had been standing in high-stakes rooms for decades and had nothing left to prove about it. She had the ICW seal on her collar and a document case that looked like it had survived several international incidents. She looked at Harry when he sat down, assessed him in about 3 seconds, and nodded. He nodded back. "I've read your statement," she said, in English with a French cadence. "The 14 pages. Good," Harry said. "It is one of the most precise personal accounts I have received in 30 years of ICW investigation," she said. "I say this as information, not as a compliment." "Understood," Harry said. McGonagall came in at 5 to 9 and sat in her chair at the foot of the table and looked at the arrangement and at Harry with an expression that was carefully composed in a way that meant it was costing her something. She had the tin of shortbread. She pushed it across the table toward him with a directness that defied the formality of the room. Harry took a piece. It was very good. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door opened and Albus Dumbledore walked in. Harry had seen pictures. Pictures hadn't covered it. Dumbledore, at whatever age he currently was, old, certainly, with the long white beard and the half-moon spectacles and the robes in deep blue scattered with silver, had a physical presence that was considerable and entirely real. Not threatening. Not performed. Just the weight of someone who had been doing significant things for a very long time and had the accumulated gravity to show for it. He came into the room and his eyes found Harry immediately, and they were blue and sharp, and Harry watched him register, in the span of about 2 seconds, everything that had changed since the scan. The aura. The ring. The 14 pages. The ICW investigator. The fact that there was nothing in Harry's face that looked like the product of 38 spells, no deferential softness, no compulsion-driven readiness to be guided, no 10-year accumulation of being made small. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression. Not shock. He was too old for shock. More like recognition, the particular quality of a very good chess player acknowledging that the board is not what they left it. His solicitor, Clearwater, a tall, precise man with the careful eyes of someone who charged by the hour, took the chair beside him. Dumbledore sat, and for a moment before he said anything, he simply looked at Harry. "Harry," he said. His voice was warm. Genuine, even. That was what was complicated about it. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. A small pause. Dumbledore had presumably expected something else, something less composed, perhaps, or something more hostile, either of which would have given him more to work with. Harry's complete evenness gave him nothing. "I imagine," Dumbledore said, "that you have a great many things you want to say to me." "Questions," Harry said. "Not statements." "I said that in my letter." "So you did." Dumbledore folded his hands on the table. He was looking at Harry the way Harry had been reading documents all week, with full attention, taking in every detail. "Then ask." Harry looked at him for a moment. He had the questions in order. He'd put them in order deliberately, not chronologically, not by severity, but by what the answers would reveal and in what sequence. He'd thought about it for 3 days. "The prophecy," Harry said. "What does it say?" "Exactly." Clearwater shifted in his chair. Dumbledore's hand stayed still. "The full prophecy is held in the Ministry's Hall of Prophecy," Dumbledore said. "It was recorded in, you've heard it," Harry said. "You were there when it was made." "What does it say?" Marchand's quill was moving steadily. Ragnarok was motionless beside Harry. McGonagall, at the foot of the table, was looking at the surface of the table with an expression of very controlled attention. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he said, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." The room was very quiet. "Thank you," Harry said. Second question. The meeting in September 1981. You told the Order that the magic required to defeat Voldemort permanently requires my willingness to die. Is that accurate? The silence changed quality. Clearwater said, in a measured voice, "I'd advise, I'm answering," Dumbledore said, and Clearwater closed his mouth. Dumbledore looked at Harry steadily. "It is more complex than that summary suggests," he said. "When Voldemort attacked your parents that night, he used a killing curse on you. You survived because of your mother's sacrificial protection, love magic, which is ancient and not fully understood. In doing so, Voldemort inadvertently created," he paused. "He created a piece of himself in you. A fragment of his soul. In order for Voldemort to be permanently destroyed, that fragment must be destroyed. And it cannot be destroyed by any external force. The only way is for me to die," Harry said. Dumbledore's hands, still folded on the table, tightened fractionally. "To present yourself to him. To allow the curse." "Yes. And then, if I am right, and I believe I am right, the protection your mother created would reassert, and you would survive." "You believe," Harry said. A pause. "Yes. You placed a sacrifice compulsion on a 15-month-old based on something you believe." The room was very, very still. "I placed protective measures," Dumbledore began. "No," Harry said. Quietly. Completely without heat. "Let me read you the annotation from Gringotts' documentation of spell number 61. Placed October 1981. Loyalty compulsion, subject's core drive oriented toward self-sacrifice in service of designated greater good, resistance to sacrifice scenario suppressed, intellectual reframing of sacrifice as noble and necessary reinforced at core level." That is not a protective measure. That is a modification to a child's fundamental orientation toward their own life. Dumbledore said nothing. "I'm not asking you to agree with my characterization," Harry said. "I'm asking you to confirm or deny the factual content. Did you place a compulsion designed to make me more likely to walk toward my own death without fully weighing the alternative?" In the silence, Marchand's quill moved. "I placed measures to ensure that when the time came," Dumbledore said, and his voice was still warm but had acquired something underneath it, not quite grief, not quite regret, but the sound of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is tired, "you would be able to do what needed to be done. Without hesitation. Without the intellectual resources to choose differently," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes met his. "That's from your own meeting notes," Harry said. September 1981. ICW Archive. He paused. "You said it yourself. You didn't want me to have the ability to think my way out of it." The silence this time was different from the others. It had more weight. It had the specific weight of something stated plainly that everyone in the room can hear but that has never been said aloud before. McGonagall's hands, Harry saw at the edge of his vision, were flat on the table in front of her. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice was different now, the warmth still there but underneath it something that was genuine. Something that cost him. "I have never wanted anything except your survival and the safety of." Third question, Harry said. Why did Sirius Black not get a trial? The shift was sharp. Dumbledore blinked, once, a fractional betrayal of surprise. Sirius Black is, Clearwater started. A question for Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. Not his solicitor. Clearwater looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at Harry with a new quality in his expression, still the intelligence, still the gravity, but now also something that might have been the beginning of understanding how thoroughly the ground had shifted. Sirius was believed to have betrayed your parents, Dumbledore said. The evidence at the scene that nobody presented at a trial, Harry said, because there wasn't one. My godfather has been in Azkaban for 10 years without any judicial process. Under your direct sphere of influence, you were chief warlock of the Wizengamot in 1981. You had oversight authority over the judicial process. The emergency powers were not unlimited, Harry said. Article 14 of the Wizengamot Charter, which predates the emergency powers grant by 200 years, requires a formal hearing for any imprisonment exceeding 6 months. No emergency powers clause supersedes it. I read the charter. He paused. Did you know Sirius Black was in Azkaban without a trial? Dumbledore was quiet. Albus. McGonagall's voice, from the foot of the table. Very quiet. Very careful. Did you know? Another silence. This one had a different shape. It was not the silence of someone constructing an answer, Harry sensed, but the silence of someone arriving at a decision about honesty, weighing it against a lifetime of managing information for other people's benefit. I knew, Dumbledore said. I believed, at the time, that the evidence of his guilt was overwhelming, and that given the chaos of the immediate post-war period, a formal hearing was he stopped. I believed expediency was justified. You believed it, Harry said. So you let a man rot in Azkaban for a decade on your belief, without giving him the chance to speak in his own defense. Dumbledore looked at him. And for the first time in the meeting, Harry saw something in his face that wasn't strategy, wasn't gravity, wasn't the weight of accumulated wisdom. It was something older and simpler and much more uncomfortable. Yes, Dumbledore said. At the head of the table, Marchand had stopped writing. Her quill was still. She was looking at Dumbledore with an expression that was professionally blank in the way that meant it was deliberately containing something quite strong. I'm going to ask Investigator Marchand a question now, Harry said. If that's all right. Marchand looked at him. Of course. The statements made in this room today, including the acknowledgement that a named guardian was imprisoned without trial with the knowledge of the chief warlock, are on the formal ICW record. They are, Marchand said. This meeting was formally constituted as an ICW-observed proceeding at the request of Gringotts Bank. Everything said in this room is admissible evidence. Harry nodded. He looked back at Dumbledore. I want Sirius Black's hearing moved to next week, Harry said. Not in 2 weeks. Next week. Based on the statements made today. Clearwater opened his mouth. The chief warlock of the Wizengamot has just acknowledged knowledge of an unlawful imprisonment, Harry said, before Clearwater could speak. That acknowledgement, on the ICW record, is grounds for accelerated review. I know because I read the ICW emergency remediation protocols 3 days ago. He looked at Marchand. Am I correct? Marchand looked at him for a moment. You are correct, she said. Clearwater had no more to say. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the table, and Harry looked back at him, and the quality of the look between them was not adversarial and not warm and not anything that had a simple name. It was the look of two people who understand each other more fully than either of them had anticipated. I'll speak to Amelia Bones personally, Dumbledore said. About the hearing. I know you will, Harry said. I'm going to speak to her too. The meeting ran for another hour and a half. Harry asked 6 more questions. He asked about the protective enchantments on Privet Drive and whether the Blood Ward had required his continued suffering to function. Dumbledore said yes, and something in the room went cold for a moment. He asked about the proxy votes and what interests they had served. Dumbledore acknowledged that several votes had been cast in ways that strengthened his own institutional position, and said this in the tone of someone discovering as they spoke that they had been telling themselves a certain story about their own motives for a very long time. He asked about Severus Snape and the 7 spells placed when Harry was 4, and Dumbledore said that had been done without his direct instruction and he had not known about it until Gringotts' filing, which Sharpax noted on his record with a particular quality of attention that meant they would be verifying that independently. He asked about what happened now. With the soul fragment, with Voldemort, with the whole architecture that Dumbledore had built around a prophecy and a sacrifice. The soul fragment can be removed, Dumbledore said. There are methods, dark methods, but methods. I had not explored them because, he stopped. Because removing it changes the plan, Harry said. Because removing it was not the approach I had determined would work, Dumbledore said, and the distinction he was drawing was very small and they both knew it. I want to know the methods, Harry said. Everything you know about Horcruxes and their destruction. All of it. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Not because I'm making a decision today. But because they're my decisions to make. They've always been my decisions to make. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. They have. It was the most important thing he'd said all morning. After the meeting ended and Dumbledore and Clearwater had gone, Dumbledore pausing at the door to look back at Harry with an expression that was carrying too many things to name, and then leaving without trying to name them, McGonagall stayed behind. She sat at the foot of the table after the others had filtered out, including Marchand and Sharpax, until it was just Harry and Ragnock and her in the chamber. She had the tin of shortbread in her hands. She looked at it, then at Harry. You just did something, she said, that I have watched grown men and women attempt for 20 years and fail. I asked questions, Harry said. You made him say it. She paused. He has never, in all the years I have known him, admitted to anything in a room with a formal record. Harry looked at her. He's not a bad man, he said, and he meant it. That's actually what makes it harder. If he were simply cruel, this would be straightforward. But he thinks he loves me. He thinks everything he did was for me. McGonagall was very still. That's the most frightening kind of damage, Harry said. Done by someone who genuinely cares. McGonagall set the tin on the table. She looked at it. She said, very quietly, I should have done more. You sent 3 letters, Harry said. That's more than most people did. It's not enough. No, Harry agreed. It wasn't. He picked up the tin and offered it to her. But you're here now. And you told me the truth yesterday when you could have just carried his message. He paused. That matters. She took a piece of shortbread. They sat with that for a moment, the two of them, in the quiet of the chamber with the record quill stilled and the stone walls very solid around them. When you come to Hogwarts, she said. Not if. When. What will you need? Harry looked at the question. He'd been thinking about it, from different angles, for days. I want to know what I'm actually capable of, he said. Not what the curriculum covers at the standard pace. I want to know where my magic actually sits and what it can do, and I want teachers who'll engage with that rather than manage it. McGonagall nodded slowly. Some of them will manage it. I know. I'll work with what I have. He looked at her. Would you teach me? Not just transfiguration. I mean, would you be someone I can actually talk to? Not as the headmaster's deputy. As yourself. She looked at him for a long moment, and it was the same quality of look she'd had yesterday at the edge of the decision, and today she made it. Yes, she said. I would. Amelia Bones received Harry's owl at 2 in the afternoon, 3 hours after the meeting ended. It contained a copy of the meeting transcript. Marchand had moved with impressive speed, and a formal request for accelerated hearing on the Black case, citing Article 7 of the ICW Emergency Remediation Protocols. She was in her office. She read the transcript in 20 minutes. When she reached the point where Dumbledore acknowledged knowledge of the unlawful imprisonment, she set the document down and looked at the wall of her office for exactly 30 seconds, not thinking, just absorbing, and then picked up her quill. She wrote to 3 people simultaneously. The senior Wisengamot clerk, to pull the 1981 session records. The Azkaban warden, to request a medical assessment of prisoner Sirius Black. And Harry Potter at Gringotts Bank, with 3 words, next Wednesday. 9 o'clock. Harry received it at 3 and showed it to Ragnarok, who read it and put it down and said, a week from the arrest. 12 days total. Is that fast? Harry asked. For a case that has been sitting unresolved for 10 years. Ragnarok looked at him. It is remarkably fast. It's still 10 years too late, Harry said. He wasn't bitter about it, he was just precise. Yes, Ragnarok said. That is also true. The Azkaban warden's medical assessment arrived on Friday morning, and it was the document that Harry found hardest to read. Not because it was dramatic, it was clinical, precise, the language of medical magic stripped of emotional weight. Prisoner S. Black. Physical condition, deteriorated but stable. Nutritional deficiencies consistent with long-term inadequate food provision. Muscular atrophy from limited movement. No permanent physical injury. Psychological condition, significant. Extended exposure to Dementor presence has resulted in severe depression and emotional dysregulation. Subject demonstrates lucidity in structured interactions but shows signs of significant trauma response including hypervigilance, memory intrusion, and dissociative episodes during periods of sensory isolation. Subject is currently coherent enough to participate in judicial proceedings if transported with appropriate magical support. Harry read it twice. He read significant and severe and extended exposure and thought about 10 years in a cell with creatures that fed on happiness, and about what 10 years of that did to a 22-year-old who had just watched his best friends die and been put there because nobody bothered to check. He wrote a letter to Sirius Black. He didn't know if it would be delivered. He didn't know if Sirius was coherent enough to read it, or if the Azkaban mail system would carry it, or what state a man in Sirius's condition would be in when words arrived from a nephew he'd never met who was 11 years old. He wrote it anyway. He said, I'm Harry. I know you know who I am. I know you've been there for 10 years and I know none of it should have happened. I'm working on it. There's a hearing Wednesday. I'll be there. You don't have to be okay, I don't expect that. I just want you to know someone is coming. He sealed it and gave it to the goblin on duty and said, make sure it gets to him directly. The goblin said, Gringotts has its own mail access to Azkaban. Official correspondence channel for prisoner financial affairs. Harry hadn't known that. He thanked the goblin and went back to his room. He didn't know if Sirius would read it. He didn't know what Sirius would feel if he did. He knew he'd needed to send it, and he had, and that was the part he could control. The weekend passed in the accelerated way of weekends when significant things are imminent. Harry read, the Horcrux material Dumbledore had sent over on Friday afternoon through his solicitor, as promised, 7 rolls of parchment covering what was known about soul magic and its destruction. He read the Hogwarts curriculum documentation McGonagall had sent, along with a handwritten note that said see page 12 for what isn't included, which is in some ways more informative than what is. He read the ICW's ongoing updates on the parallel investigations triggered by Gringotts' Mordrak filing, which now included scans requested for magical children in 4 countries and was generating international press in the magical world that the British Ministry was trying and failing to manage. He also, on Saturday afternoon, did something he hadn't done since arriving at Gringotts. He found a corridor in the lower levels that was long and empty and well lit, and he practiced. Not with a wand, he didn't have one yet, and he didn't need one yet, because the magic was his before it was ever channeled through a wand, and Bark Fong had told him that extended practice without a wand in the period immediately post-removal was actually beneficial. It let the core establish its own baseline before it was shaped by a channel. Harry stood in the corridor and thought about the anger and the clarity and the enormous alive feeling of his own magic, and he reached for it the way you reach for something you know exactly where it is. It came instantly. Not explosively, he wasn't trying for explosion. He reached for it and it was there, responsive and deep and far more present than he had any framework to compare it to, because he'd never felt it without the suppression before. He did small things. He moved air. He changed the temperature in a 2-foot radius. He let a section of the stone wall develop a faint, sustained glow and then dimmed it. The control was immediate and fine-grained in a way that surprised even him, and he spent an hour in the corridor simply learning the feel of it, the range of it, the quality of it. He thought about Dumbledore saying you will have power the Dark Lord knows not. He thought about Barkfang's reading instruments. Top percentile. 62 years. He thought, all right. Let's see what that means. He spent another hour. By the end of it he was tired in a specific, clean way, the tiredness of exertion rather than suppression, the good ache of muscles that have been used properly. He went back to his room and ate dinner and slept well. On Sunday Ragnarok came and said, "We've had a response from the 3 owls Fudge sent last week. He wants a formal meeting. Next week," Harry said. "After Wednesday. You want the hearing to happen before you meet the minister. I want Sirius Black to be free before I sit in a room with the Minister of Magic," Harry said. "Yes." Ragnarok nodded. He moved to leave. "Ragnarok," Harry said. What's the latest on the proxy vote dissolution? The Wisengamot seat. Sharpax filed the formal dissolution request with the Wisengamot clerk on Thursday. It requires a 15-day notification period before taking effect, standard procedural requirement. After that, your seat reverts to your direct control. Ragnarok paused. You'll need to decide who, if anyone, represents it until you come of age. I'll represent it myself, Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him. You're 11. The charter doesn't specify an age for direct representation, Harry said. Just that the seat holder or a named proxy may cast votes. I am the seat holder. I choose direct representation. They'll try to challenge it procedurally. They will, Ragnarok said. And Gringotts' legal team will demonstrate that there is no age restriction in the charter, Harry said. We will, Ragnarok said, in a tone that suggested he found this profoundly satisfying. Good, Harry said. I'll be there in person as soon as I'm allowed into the building. Which I'd like to be before September. I'll have Sharpax arrange gallery access for the next session, Ragnarok said. The session after the Black hearing. Let them see you before the formal challenge is filed. Let them make of it what they will. Harry nodded. He turned back to his reading. Wednesday arrived. Harry was up at 5 and dressed by 5:30 and read for an hour and ate breakfast and was ready by 7, which was 2 hours before the hearing was scheduled. He sat in his room with his notes and his tea and let the waiting exist without trying to fill it. He'd always been good at waiting. At Privet Drive it had been a survival skill, waiting for the moment to pass, for the mood to shift, for the thing to be over. Here it was different. He was waiting towards something rather than away from it. Ragnarok came at 8:30 and they went together through Gringotts' private FLU network to the Ministry of Magic's judicial wing, a route that bypassed the main atrium and deposited them directly in the anteroom outside courtroom 10, which was the DMLE's primary hearing chamber. Amelia Bones was already outside the courtroom, in conversation with a senior Auror Harry didn't recognize. She looked up when they arrived and nodded. She was wearing official robes, deep plum, the DMLE formal color, and her monocle, and she had the Gringotts file under her arm with her own notes tabbed throughout it. He arrives at 9, she said. He's being transported from Azkaban this morning. Medical support is in place. She paused. He may not be, you should prepare for the possibility that he is not in a condition to engage fully. I know, Harry said. That's fine. He just needs to be in the room. She looked at him. She looked at the signet ring. She looked back at his face. "Are you ready for this?" she said, and it wasn't a professional assessment, it was a genuine question, from one person to another. "Yes," Harry said. McGonagall arrived at 8:50. She had obviously come directly from Hogwarts. There was something of summer morning about her, like she'd been there when she got the time and date confirmation and had left immediately. She came and stood beside Harry and didn't say anything, which was the right thing. At 3 minutes to 9, the door at the far end of the corridor opened. The two Aurors who came through first were professional and businesslike, and Harry barely registered them. He registered the man between them, because the man between them was Sirius Black, and Sirius Black was, Harry had read the medical report, he'd read the 10-year history, he'd built a picture from documents and records and notes, but the picture had not prepared him for the physical reality of the man. He was gaunt in the specific way of someone who has been somewhere that cost them everything. His hair was long and unwashed, and his eyes were deep-set in a face that had the quality of a landscape after a drought, all the essential structure still there, the bones of it, the fundamental shape of what had once been a handsome, vital young man, but hollowed by years in ways that wouldn't reverse quickly. He moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who'd spent 10 years in a small cell and still wasn't fully certain about open spaces. But his eyes were clear. That was what mattered. Gray eyes, fully present, taking in the corridor with a sharp attention that the years hadn't managed to dull completely. Those eyes found Harry, and stopped. Harry didn't move toward him. He read the situation well enough to know that sudden movement wasn't what this needed. He stood still and met Sirius's eyes and let the recognition happen at its own pace. Sirius Black looked at him for a long moment. "You look like James," he said. His voice was rougher than it had probably ever been, scoured by disuse and damp stone. "Except the eyes." "My mother's eyes," Harry said. Sirius's face moved, not a smile, but the shadow of one, the ghost of a reflex that had been almost 10 years dormant, finding its way back. "She'd have hated this corridor," he said. "Too many portraits." Harry looked at the portraits. There were 4 of them on the corridor walls, former ministers and senior officials in formal poses. "They do seem pleased with themselves," he said. This time it was closer to a smile. The Aurors on either side of Sirius both looked faintly startled, as though they'd been expecting something different from this moment. "I got your letter," Sirius said. "Good," Harry said. "You said you were working on it." Sirius's eyes moved briefly to Ragnarok beside Harry, then the document cases, then back to Harry. "You weren't joking." "No," Harry said. "I don't really joke about things I'm working on." Another fractional movement, not a smile exactly, something more complicated than that. Something that had 10 years of weight behind it. The courtroom doors opened and Amelia Bones said, "We should go in." Harry fell into step beside Sirius, not behind him, and Sirius looked at him sideways as they walked, with the particular quality of someone who is looking at a person and also looking at a fact about the world. That 12 days ago this boy had been in a cupboard on Privet Drive, and today he had somehow constructed a situation in which a 10-year unlawful imprisonment was being addressed in courtroom 10 of the Ministry of Magic. "How?" Sirius said, quietly, as they reached the door. "Gringotts did an inheritance scan," Harry said. "Found 67 spells on me. Invoked Mordrak's claws. Then I read a lot of documents." Sirius stared at him. "I'll explain later," Harry said. After. The hearing took 3 hours and was, in Sharpak's professional assessment afterward, one of the cleaner judicial proceedings he had seen in 40 years of practice. Amelia Bones ran it with the precision of a woman who had been waiting her whole career for a piece of procedural history to land in her courtroom and was not going to let it be anything less than correct. She called witnesses in order, the 2 surviving Aurors from the original arrest, both of whom confirmed under veritaserum that no charges had been formally filed and no hearing had been scheduled, the Azkaban intake records clerk, who confirmed the same, a senior legal historian who testified on the specific charter provisions that had been violated. Then she called Sirius Black. He sat in the chair in the center of the courtroom, the chair with the old, rusted chains that didn't activate, because he was not a prisoner under formal charge, and he answered the questions put to him by Amelia with the careful attention of a man who understood that every word he said was being recorded and had waited 10 years for the opportunity. He was not dramatic. He did not perform. He said what had happened on November 1, 1981, clearly and in sequence, and he named the real secret keeper, Peter Pettigrew, who had betrayed the Potters and then faked his own death and cut off his own finger and transformed into a rat, and he answered Amelia's follow-up questions with the precision of someone who had spent 10 years with nothing to do but remember. Harry sat in the gallery behind Ragnarok and watched. He watched Sirius in the chair and thought about the month of October 1981 and the chain of events, the betrayal, the deaths, the imprisonment, the cupboard, the 67 spells. He thought about how many choices by how many people had led to this courtroom, and how almost all of them had been made by people who believed they were doing something necessary. He thought about what it meant to do something necessary versus something right, and about whether those things were supposed to be the same. McGonagall sat 3 seats along the gallery from him. At a certain point during Sirius's testimony, when Sirius described the night he'd arrived at Godric's Hollow after the Potters died and found only a baby in the rubble, McGonagall made a small sound that was very quickly controlled. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor of the gallery for a moment. Harry didn't comment on it. He just shifted his chair slightly toward her, and she straightened and looked at the courtroom again, and that was enough. At the end of Sirius's testimony, Amelia Bones called a brief recess and conferred with the 2 other judicial members, a Wisengamot senior member named Griselda Marchbanks, who was 80 if she was a day and had the expression of someone who had seen too much bad procedure in her career and had opinions about it, and a younger member Harry didn't recognize. They conferred for 7 minutes. Then they came back. Amelia Bones looked at the courtroom and said, "In the matter of the Crown versus Sirius Orion Black, this judicial panel finds that the imprisonment of the above-named individual from November 1981 was unlawful, having been executed without the formal charges and judicial hearing required by Wisengamot Charter. This panel finds further that no evidence has been presented before any judicial body, then or now, establishing Mr. Black's guilt in the matters for which he was imprisoned. Accordingly, the imprisonment is declared void, the record expunged, and Mr. Black is free, effective immediately." The room was silent for a moment. Then Griselda Marchbanks said, with the force of someone who has been wanting to say something for a long time, "And this panel formally notes for the record that this proceeding should have taken place in November 1981 and the fact that it did not represents a catastrophic failure of the judicial safeguards this institution exists to uphold. That failure will be formally investigated." She looked at Amelia. "By yourself, I assume." "Already underway," Amelia said. Sirius Black was sitting in the chair in the center of the courtroom with his hands on his knees and his eyes very bright, and he was breathing the specific way of someone who has just heard something they stopped being able to believe they would ever hear. Harry looked at him from the gallery and thought about the letter he'd sent, "Someone is coming." He'd made it. The corridor outside courtroom 10 afterward was crowded in the way of consequential moments, Aurors and administrative staff and Marchand from the ICW and Amelia Bones speaking to her senior Auror and McGonagall standing slightly to one side looking like someone who needed a moment and was giving it to herself professionally. Harry crossed the corridor to Sirius, who was standing with the 2 medical support staff Amelia had arranged, accepting a glass of water with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a large number of things at once. Sirius looked up when Harry arrived. "Well," Sirius said. "Well," Harry agreed. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the ring on Harry's right hand. He looked at the document case under Harry's arm and at Ragnarok, who had followed Harry and now stood a respectful distance back. He looked at Harry's face. "James would have loved this," Sirius said. "All of this. The documents and the strategy and the—" he made a gesture that encompassed the hearing room and the corridor and the general situation. He was terrible at strategy. Completely impulsive. He'd have set something on fire by now. "I thought about it," Harry said. Sirius laughed. It was a rusty, startled sound, clearly not a thing he'd done in a very long time, but genuine. "God," he said. You sound like Lily. Harry felt something warm and complicated arrive in his chest and let it be there. You need somewhere to stay, he said. Sirius blinked. Yes, I suppose Gringotts has client accommodation, Harry said. Ragnarok. He looked back. Ragnarok was already nodding fractionally, which meant he'd anticipated this. We can accommodate Mr. Black for as long as necessary, Ragnarok said. Medical support, meals, and security. He paused. It is a better option than any alternative currently available, given that the Ministry's position on the situation has not yet been fully resolved. Sirius looked at the bank's director of 1100-year-old institution, who was arranging his accommodation on the instruction of an 11-year-old boy, and then back at Harry. You did all this, Sirius said. In 12 days. Gringotts did the heavy lifting, Harry said. I just asked the right questions. Sirius reached out and put his hand on Harry's shoulder, carefully, like someone who isn't sure yet what they're allowed to do, but doing it anyway because some things need to be done. His hand was thin and worn but the grip was real. Thank you, he said. Harry held the look. You're my family, he said. You should have been there from the beginning. We're just catching up. Sirius Black, who had been 12 days out of 10 years in Azkaban and had not had anyone say anything like that to him in longer than that, looked at Harry Potter for a moment and did not say anything, because there wasn't anything adequate, and Harry understood that, and they stood in the corridor together while the business of the Ministry moved around them, and it was enough. That evening, back in Gringotts, Harry sat in his room with the window showing the London dusk and wrote in his notebook. He wrote, Sirius, free. Hearing complete. Amelia Bones has opened investigation into 1981 procedure. He wrote, Dumbledore admitted to the meeting record, sacrifice compulsion, knowledge of unlawful imprisonment, proxy votes serving his institutional interests. He wrote, ICW parallel investigations, 4 countries, growing. Marchand says full report within 6 weeks. He wrote, Wisengamot seat, 14 days to dissolution of proxy. After that, mine. He looked at the list. He thought about Fudge waiting for a meeting. He thought about the Horcrux documentation from Dumbledore. He thought about September and Hogwarts and what it would mean to walk through those doors with everything he now knew. He wrote one more line, what comes next is architecture, not destruction. He underlined it. Then he went down the corridor to the room Gringotts had given Sirius and knocked on the door, and when Sirius said come in, he came in and sat in the chair by the wall and said, Tell me about my parents. Tell me what they were actually like. And Sirius Black, who had been sitting on the edge of his bed looking like a man relearning how to inhabit the world, looked at Harry and took a breath and started to talk. They were there until midnight. Chapter 5, The Reckoning. The Ministry of Magic's atrium on a Thursday morning had the specific energy of an institution that knows something is coming and has not yet decided how to stand when it arrives. Harry noticed it the moment he stepped out of the flue, the way the security staff at the entrance desk were a fraction too alert, the way the golden statues of the Fountain of Magical Brethren had been recently repolished to an almost aggressive shine, the way the witches and wizards crossing the polished floor moved with the slightly too deliberate pace of people who had been told to appear normal and were concentrating on it. 3 days had passed since the Black hearing. 3 days in which the Prophet had run 4 front-page stories, the ICW had released a partial summary of its findings to member nations, and the Ministry had said nothing publicly except a careful statement from the Minister's press office describing the Gringotts proceedings as a complex matter currently under review. Harry crossed the atrium with Ragnarok on his left and Sharpax on his right and felt the room register him. Not dramatically, nobody shouted or pointed, but in the way a room registers something it has been expecting. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The security witch at the wand registration desk looked up and then looked at her senior colleague, and her senior colleague looked at Ragnarok, and Ragnarok looked straight ahead with the expression of a man who did not require permission to be anywhere. Harry had dressed deliberately this morning. The goblin-tailored clothes, the Potter's signet ring, the document case Gringotts had provided, dark leather, his initials tooled into the corner in the Potter family's particular shade of bronze. He hadn't dressed to perform anything. He'd dressed to be precisely what he was, Harry James Potter, Lord of the ancient and most noble house of Potter, walking into the Ministry of Magic for the first time on his own terms. The meeting with Cornelius Fudge was at 10. It was 9:47. Harry had timed his arrival to give himself 13 minutes to read the room before the minister appeared. A man materialized at his elbow within 30 seconds of his arrival, young, anxious, ministry badge reading Pete Weasley, Senior Undersecretary, Junior, and said, with the slightly strangled politeness of someone executing an instruction they found uncomfortable, "Mr. Potter, the minister is ready for you in conference room 1. "Good," Harry said. "Is Investigator Marchand here yet?" Percy Weasley blinked. Yes, she arrived 20 minutes ago. I wasn't aware she was expected." "She is," Harry said. "Please make sure she's in the room." Percy looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked straight ahead. Percy looked back at Harry with the expression of someone rapidly recalculating the morning he'd been told to expect. "Of course," Percy said, and led them to conference room 1. Cornelius Fudge was a round man in a pinstriped suit who wore his authority the way some men wear a hat, as though he'd picked it up one day and become so accustomed to it that he'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of his head. He was standing when they came in, which Harry registered as a choice. Standing to greet them communicated a combination of deference and control that was carefully calibrated. Behind him were 2 senior advisors and his own legal representative and, Harry noted, someone he recognized from the Wisengamot proxy vote records as Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Umbridge was small and broad and wearing robes in a shade of pink that was doing a great deal of work to appear non-threatening, and she was smiling with a completeness that had nothing behind it. Harry looked at her for exactly long enough to make the assessment, then looked at Fudge. "Minister," he said. "Harry, my boy," Fudge said, with warmth that was entirely manufactured and partially believed, which was an interesting combination. "Please, sit down." "I've been so looking forward to, Ragnarok," Harry said, without sitting down, the chair. Ragnarok moved smoothly to the chair at the head of the conference table, the one that Fudge's arrangement of seats had implied was the minister's position, and placed Harry's document case on it. Harry sat in it. Ragnarok sat to his right. Sharpak sat to his left. Fudge's smile didn't quite make it through the moment, but he recovered quickly, which told Harry something about him. He sat. His advisors sat. Umbridge sat with a quality of stillness that was paying very close attention. Marchand came in 30 seconds later, caught Harry's eye briefly, and sat at the corner of the table with her ICW case and her quill. "I want to say, first," Fudge began, with the voice of a man who has prepared an opening statement and will be getting it out, that the Ministry fully supports the rights of Gringotts Bank to conduct its business without interference, and that we understand that the recent, unfortunate, findings have created a situation that requires careful management. We want very much to work with you, Harry, with Mr. Potter and his representatives, to resolve this in a way that serves everyone's interests." Harry looked at him. He waited until it was clear he wasn't going to respond immediately, letting the silence stretch just enough to establish that Fudge's opening had not landed the way it was intended to. "Thank you," Harry said. "I want to raise several things. I'll go in order." Fudge nodded. Umbridge's smile didn't waver. "First," Harry said, "the Ministry's 5 press statements since the ICW filing have consistently described the Gringotts proceedings as a commercial dispute that has been inappropriately escalated. The most recent one, issued Tuesday, suggested that the caster attributions in the evidentiary filing may be subject to challenge." He opened his document case. "I want the Ministry to understand that the ICW has already reviewed and accepted the full evidentiary submission, including the caster attributions, and that any public statement questioning its accuracy is going to create a direct conflict with the ICW's official findings." He slid a single document across the table. "That's the ICW acceptance letter. You may keep that copy." Fudge looked at the document. His senior advisor looked at the document. Umbridge looked at Harry with her smile precisely as it had been, which was itself an answer about how she processed information. Second, Harry said, the proxy votes. I've reviewed the complete voting record from the last decade. 46 votes were cast in my name by Albus Dumbledore as proxy. 9 of those votes directly strengthened the institutional position of the Hogwarts headmaster relative to the Wizengamot. 14 extended emergency powers provisions that had been due for review. I want the Ministry to acknowledge, formally, that those votes were cast without my knowledge or consent, and I want a review of their outcomes initiated. Fudge's senior advisor, a tall man with the look of someone who had spent 20 years smoothing edges, said, the proxy arrangement was entirely legal under the 1871 Charter Amendment, Harry said, which permits proxy voting for incapacitated or minor clients. I was not incapacitated. I was unaware. There is a legal distinction, and I'll be happy to let Sharpax elaborate on it if that's useful. Sharpax had his quill ready with the expression of someone who would find it very useful indeed. Fudge raised his hand to his senior advisor in the gesture of let's not do that right now and looked at Harry with an expression that was being renegotiated in real time. The warmth had been replaced by something more careful, less performed, more genuine, which Harry actually preferred. Mr. Potter, Fudge said, and my boy was gone, what is it, exactly, that you want from this meeting? Let's speak plainly. All right, Harry said. 3 things. The Ministry publicly acknowledges the ICW findings as accurate, not a commercial dispute, not subject to challenge. The Wizengamot voting record is formally reviewed by an independent body. And the DMLE investigation into the unlawful imprisonment of Sirius Black proceeds without political interference. Those are reasonable, Fudge said, and he sounded faintly surprised by this. I know they are, Harry said. I'm not here to be unreasonable. I'm here to establish what the ground actually looks like now, so that we can proceed from facts. Fudge looked at him across the table for a moment. He was doing the calculation that Harry had expected him to do, the political one, the one that measured cost against cost. Acknowledging the ICW findings publicly was embarrassing but survivable. A prolonged fight with Gringotts over ICW-validated evidence was neither. The Ministry of Magic needed Gringotts' cooperation on approximately 47 ongoing matters that had nothing to do with Harry Potter and would be significantly complicated by a sustained institutional conflict. Harry knew this because he'd read the Ministry Gringotts cooperative agreements file that Sharpax had produced on Tuesday. I'll need to consult with my legal team, Fudge said. Of course, Harry said. Gringotts' response window is 72 hours, after which we escalate to formal ICW mediation. He closed his document case. That's the scheduled timeline. I don't control it. He controlled it entirely. Ragnarok had set the 72-hour window at Harry's suggestion. Umbridge spoke for the first time, and her voice was exactly what Harry had expected from the smile, soft, precise, with the particular quality of sugared language that is not actually sweet. Mr. Potter, we are all so deeply concerned about what you've been through. Such a difficult experience for a young person. I wonder if in addition to these formal matters, we might find an opportunity to discuss your well-being more personally. The Ministry has resources for young people who have experienced. Thank you, Harry said, looking at her with an attention that was complete and level and did not perform warmth. That's not necessary. He held her gaze just long enough to make it plain that the offer had been identified for what it was. Is there anything the Ministry wants to raise with me? A beat. Umbridge's smile remained in place with the dedication of a flag in a gale. The matter of Albus Dumbledore, Fudge said, and his voice had found a different register, lower, more careful, the register of something he'd been working up to. There are members of the Wizengamot who feel that the characterization of his actions, in the ICW filing, is accurate, Harry said. Strong, Fudge finished. The ICW characterization is based on a 400-page evidentiary submission with 37 appendices, Harry said. If members of the Wizengamot have specific evidentiary challenges, they're welcome to submit them to Investigator Marchand. He nodded toward Marchand, who nodded back without expression. Dumbledore himself made admissible statements in the Thursday meeting that confirmed the core findings. I was there. Fudge looked at him with the expression of a man who is not accustomed to being managed and is experiencing it clearly for the first time from an unexpected direction. You're 11 years old, Fudge said. It came out sounding more like an observation than an argument. I know, Harry said. Is there anything else? The meeting ended at 11:15. In the corridor outside Conference Room 1, Percy Weasley materialized again with the expression of someone who has been waiting just outside the door and has significant questions about what he'd heard. Harry looked at him. He looked about 17, earnest, precise, the kind of young man who had taken a ministry job because he believed in institutions and was going to spend the rest of his life managing his feelings about what institutions actually were. Was there something you needed? Harry said. No, Percy said. No. You'll need an escort to the Flow Point. He paused. I just wanted to say. He stopped again. What? Harry said. Percy straightened. My father works in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. He's been at the ministry for 20 years and he's a good man and he says what's been done to you is wrong. He said it before any of this. He said it. Percy stopped himself with the efficiency of someone applying professional discipline to a personal statement. I just wanted you to know that not everyone here is, he gestured at Conference Room 1. Harry looked at him for a moment. What's your father's name? Arthur Weasley. I'll remember it, Harry said. Percy escorted them to the Flow Point and they left, and in the corridor behind them Harry could hear Umbridge's voice through the conference room door, speaking to Fudge in a low, measured tone that had the quality of a machine recalibrating for a different approach. He made a mental note about her and added it to the list of things requiring attention. Back at Gringotts, Sirius was waiting in the common area outside Harry's room, sitting in a chair with a cup of tea and the Morning Prophet, which he'd been reading with an expression that suggested the Prophet was failing to adequately cover its own recent history. In 3 days of recovery under Gringotts' medical care, Sirius had not transformed into a well person. 10 years of Azkaban was not a 3-day project, but he had washed and eaten properly and slept in a real bed, and the difference between the man in the hearing room corridor and the man in the chair was visible. He still moved carefully. He still had the deep-set eyes and the gaunt quality. But there was more of him present, more of whatever the man had been before Azkaban finding its way back through the layers of damage, and when he looked up at Harry arriving from the Flow, there was a sharpness in his grey eyes that felt like the real thing. How was the minister? Sirius asked. Harry sat down across from him. Manageable. He reached over and took the Prophet from Sirius and looked at the front page. Gringotts Potter dispute, ministry seeks resolution. He put it down. He'll agree to the 3 points within 72 hours. He doesn't have a better option. You terrify him, Sirius said, with something in his voice that was edging toward genuine amusement. I inform him, Harry said. The terror is his own contribution. Sirius made the rusty laughing sound again. It was coming more easily than it had 3 days ago. Your father would have been terrified of you and incredibly proud simultaneously, he said. Your mother would have said obviously when people expressed surprise, and then written you a letter with 12 pages of additional research. Harry looked at him. Tell me more about that. Her research habit. Oh, it was legendary. Sirius leaned back in the chair and something in his posture eased, the careful deliberateness of his movement softening slightly into something more like the way someone sits when they're not expecting anything bad. She was in the library more than Remus, which is saying something because Remus practically lived there. But hers wasn't like his was systematic, very thorough, very organized. Hers was, she'd go in to look up one thing and come out 3 hours later with 17 tangents and a theory about something nobody had ever connected before. He paused. She was the one who first told Dumbledore about the old sacrificial magic. The love protection. His voice shifted fractionally on Dumbledore's name, a small drop in temperature. Not that he told her what he was planning to do with the information. Harry filed this away. He'd been filing a lot of things Sirius told him, not just for strategy but because they were pieces of his parents, and he was building them into a picture that was more complete than the photographs and the documents and the things other people had told him secondhand. "He's going to want to speak to you," Harry said. "Dumbledore. He'll see the ministry meeting in the Prophet and he'll want to know what was said." "He can want," Sirius said, with a flatness that had nothing performed about it. "I know. But it's coming." Harry looked at him. "I'm not going to manage how you handle that. It's yours to decide. I just want you to know the timeline." Sirius looked at him. The gray eyes were doing something complicated. "You know what's strange," he said. "About being out?" Harry waited. "The last conversation I had with James," Sirius said, about anything real, not about the war or the hiding or the endless bloody security measures, was about you. He'd just got back from the hospital and you were 3 weeks old and he couldn't stop talking about you." Sirius looked at the teacup in his hands. "He said you'd grabbed his finger and wouldn't let go." A pause. "He said he'd never felt more scared and more certain about anything in his life, both at once." Harry was very still. "He'd have wanted to be here," Sirius said. "For all of this. He'd have been so," he stopped. "I know," Harry said. Sirius looked up. "How do you know?" "You never, because you're here," Harry said. "And you're like him, I think. And the way you talk about him, I can see it. What he would have been." He held Sirius's gaze. "It's enough. It's not the same as having him, but it's enough." Sirius Black looked at Harry Potter for a long moment and didn't say anything, and Harry let the silence stand because some things don't need to be filled. The Wizengamot session was on Friday, and Harry went. He went without announcement, or rather, Sharpax had notified the Wizengamot clerk of his intention to attend as an observer pending the formal dissolution of the proxy, and the clerk had formally acknowledged it and said nothing more, which meant the Wizengamot had known he was coming and had collectively decided not to make it a thing in advance. Harry found this interesting. It suggested that the membership had been having internal conversations about how to handle his arrival and had not reached a consensus. He arrived with Ragnak and Sharpax and took a seat in the public gallery, which had 3 other observers in it, a journalist, an ICW administrative clerk, and someone whose badge Harry couldn't read from the gallery but whose document case had a foreign ministry seal. He sat in the center of the front row of the gallery and watched the chamber below. The Wizengamot was already in session when he arrived, a mid-level discussion about an amendment to the Magical Creatures Registry. Harry listened to it with full attention and noted 3 things. The quality of the argument from different speakers told him quickly who the serious thinkers were and who was performing. The procedural management of the session was done by an extremely competent clerk who was quietly doing most of the actual work, and the fact of his presence in the gallery had been registered by approximately 2/3 of the members within 2 minutes of his arrival, communicated entirely through the particular quality of attention some people pay to a spot they're trying not to look at. He found it peaceful. He read the Magical Creatures Registry Amendment while it was being discussed and had opinions about it by the time the vote was called. Griselda Marchbanks was in the chamber. She spotted him in the gallery early and looked at him with the same assessment she'd given him in the hearing room, sharp, direct, asking nothing and noticing everything. When the session broke for a brief procedural recess, she came up to the gallery with the speed of a woman in her 80s who moves faster than people expect. She sat beside him. She did not preface it with anything. "You're observing," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "The proxy dissolution is 8 days away." "I know. When your seat is yours directly, there will be a challenge. Several members will argue procedural grounds, that you're too young to cast votes meaningfully, that the seat should remain in proxy until you reach majority." She looked at him with her bright, sharp eyes. "They will lose that challenge, because the charter doesn't support their position. But they will make it loudly." "I know," Harry said. "What will you do with the seat?" she asked. Not challenging him, assessing. Harry looked at the chamber below. Vote on the things that come before it, he said. Based on what I actually think, after actually reading the material. Marchbanks was quiet for a moment. That is a more radical statement in this chamber than you might imagine, she said. I gathered, Harry said. She looked at him sideways. Your grandmother was a Pruitt, she said. Before she became a Potter. I knew her. She voted the same way, based on what she actually thought, after reading everything. She was rather unpopular for about 15 years and then she wasn't, because she'd been right consistently enough that people started paying attention. Harry looked at her. What happened to her? Dragon pox, 1979. Before all of this. Marchbanks paused. Your grandfather too, the year before. You've had bad luck with family. I'm collecting them again, Harry said. Marchbanks looked at him for a moment. Then she made a small sound that was the closest thing to a laugh Harry had yet heard from her, which he suspected was saying something. 8 days, she said. I'll be watching. She went back down to the chamber. 3 days before the proxy dissolution was scheduled to take effect, Narcissa Malfoy arrived at Gringotts. Harry had not expected her. He had not expected her. He'd read enough about the major wizarding families to know that the Malfoys were the kind of family that read the wind early and moved accordingly, and the wind had been blowing in one clear direction for 2 weeks. But he hadn't placed them on his immediate timeline. She arrived formally, through the proper channels, requesting a private meeting with Harry Potter at his earliest convenience, and she arrived with no legal representative and no husband and no son, just herself, in robes that were elegant in the way of things that don't need to announce themselves. Harry received her in the small meeting room rather than the formal chamber, partly because the formal chamber had the weight of the recent Dumbledore meeting still in it, and partly because a smaller room was more honest about what this probably was. Narcissa Malfoy was beautiful in the specific way of aristocratic structure, all clean angles and composed surface, the kind of face that had learned early to give nothing away and had become very good at it. She came in and sat down with the ease of someone who had been in significant rooms for her entire life, and she looked at Harry without the recalibration that most adults went through in the first 30 seconds. She'd done her recalibration before she arrived. Ragnarok was present. He sat at the corner of the room with the stillness of someone who is present as a witness and has opinions about the visitor that he's keeping to himself. Mr. Potter, Narcissa said. Mrs. Malfoy, Harry said. I'll be direct, she said. Because I think you prefer it and because I don't have a use for anything else today. Go ahead. My husband has been a supporter of Albus Dumbledore's vision for the magical world, she said, with the precision of someone choosing each word like a piece of a structure that has to bear weight. He has also, historically, aligned himself with certain, alternative political positions. The kind that become very uncomfortable when the institutional landscape shifts significantly. Harry looked at her. He waited. The institutional landscape, she said, has shifted significantly. Yes, Harry said. My son starts Hogwarts in September, she said. He is 11 years old and he has nothing to do with the decisions his father has made. She held Harry's gaze. I want to know where the lines are going to be drawn. Harry looked at her for a moment. She was doing something genuinely complicated. She was not performing remorse, not constructing a narrative about being the reasonable Malfoy. She was being a mother who had looked at the situation clearly and decided that her child's future was more important than any political position. He respected the directness of it. I'm not drawing lines against children, Harry said. I'm not drawing lines against anyone based on their family name. I'm drawing lines based on what people do. He held her gaze. Your son is starting school. That's a clean slate if he wants it to be. She looked at him for a long moment. And Lucius, she said. What your husband does with the situation he's in is his choice, Harry said. I'm not in the business of deciding that for him either. A pause. But the ICW investigation is going to look at the full network of people who were party to the decisions made about my life. Anyone who was involved, directly or indirectly, is going to be examined. That's not something I control, that's the process. Narcissa nodded. She'd known this before she arrived. She was here to confirm it, and to establish something. What are you asking for? Harry said. Directly. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I'm making an introduction. Under different circumstances, we would have been introduced properly, through family channels, before either of us started school. You were Harry Potter. My family was, she paused. We were on the wrong side of where you've ended up. I'm acknowledging that. She straightened slightly. And I'm telling you that my son doesn't need to be on the wrong side of anything. Harry looked at her. He thought about what Ragnarok had said about people who weren't working for someone else, about giving people room to be what they already were. Tell your son, Harry said, that it's better to make up your own mind about people than to use someone else's opinion as a shortcut. In every direction. He paused. If he works that out, he'll be fine. Narcissa Malfoy looked at him for a moment. Something moved in her face, not the composed surface, something underneath it, something that was genuinely surprised and then wasn't. That's interesting advice, she said. It's the advice I wish someone had given me, Harry said. She stood. She looked at Ragnarok briefly, acknowledging his presence for the first time since she'd sat down, and Ragnarok gave her the fractional nod of someone assessing a situation and updating their assessment upward. Thank you for your time, she said to Harry. Thank you for coming directly, Harry said. She left, and Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. That, he said, was not what I expected from Narcissa Malfoy. She loves her son, Harry said. The rest is position. She can move the position. Some people can't, Ragnarok said. Some people can, Harry said. You read it in the first 30 seconds. She came alone. No lawyer, no husband, no performance of status. Just herself and the question. Ragnarok said nothing for a moment. Then, Lucius Malfoy is going to be a problem. Probably, Harry said. But that's a later problem. He picked up his document case. What time is the Wisengamot clerk expecting the formal dissolution confirmation? Monday at 10. Good, Harry said. I want to be there. Monday came with the particular quality of something formal being made real. The proxy dissolution was a procedural matter, a clerk's signature, a wax seal, an entry in the record. There was no ceremony attached to it. Harry went to the Wisengamot clerking office at 10 in the morning, watched the clerk sign the dissolution document, countersigned it himself with the Potter family seal, and that was that. The proxy was gone. The seat was his. The clerk, a small woman who had clearly been doing this for 30 years and had developed a perfect professional neutrality, handed him his copy of the document and said, "Next session is the third Tuesday of the month. Member correspondence should be directed through the standard channel." Thank you, Harry said. He took the document and walked out into the ministry corridor, and Ragnarok fell into step beside him, and Sharpax on the other side, and the morning continued. It was, on its surface, a very undramatic thing. A form signed. A seat transferred. Harry felt it none the less, the weight of it, the particular quality of something that had been someone else's and was now precisely, legally, completely his. The Wisengamot challenge came on Tuesday, as Marchbanks had predicted, and came loudly. A senior member named Tiberius Ogden rose on a point of procedural order within the first 10 minutes of the session and said, with the confidence of someone who had been the kind of wizard who believes his confidence is its own argument, that the charter provisions for direct representation by a minor were subject to interpretation and that the House's responsibility to the stability of the institution required a formal review of the Potter seat's current status. Harry was in the gallery. Ogden did not look at the gallery. Griselda Marchbanks responded from the floor before anyone else could. She said, in the voice of someone who had been reading the charter since before Ogden's grandfather was born, that the relevant provisions were not subject to interpretation by a body that stood to benefit from a particular interpretation, that the charter language was explicit on the point of direct versus proxy representation, and that anyone who had read it, she said, read it with a specific quality that suggested she was making a statement about who had done so, would arrive at a single conclusion. 3 other members supported the challenge. 4 responded to Marchbanks. The clerk called for a procedural vote. Harry watched from the gallery and made no expression. The vote was 23 to 19 against the challenge. The Potter's seat remained in direct control. Harry noted the 19 who had voted for the challenge and the 23 who had voted against, because those numbers were information and information was what you worked with. When the session broke at noon, Marchbanks came up to the gallery again, moving with the same efficient speed, and sat beside him. 23, Harry said. A workable margin, she said. For now. It'll shift. He looked at the chamber. Not all 19 were voting on principle. Some of them were voting on habit, the habit of the way things have been done. Habits change when circumstances change enough. He paused. Who are the 5 I should actually talk to? Marchbanks looked at him with her sharp eyes. She took out a small notepad and wrote 5 names and passed it to him. He read them and folded the paper into his inside pocket. You're going to be exhausting for this institution, she said, with a quality that wasn't quite a complaint. Probably, Harry said. Is that all right? It's necessary, she said, and went back down. Dumbledore requested a second meeting on Wednesday. Not through a solicitor this time. Directly, in a letter addressed to Harry personally, in the hand Harry had now seen enough of to recognize. It said, I think we have more to discuss. I do not mean this as a continuation of the formal proceedings. I mean it as, something more honest than that. Harry sat with the letter for an hour. He thought about the first meeting, the formal record, the measured questions, the way Dumbledore had said things that cost him in the specificity of the room's silence. He thought about what more honest than that might mean from a man who was very intelligent and very tired and had been running a plan for 30 years that had just had most of its architecture pulled out. He wrote back, Saturday. Gringotts. No legal representatives. Dumbledore's response arrived within the hour, Saturday. Thank you. Ragnarok said, when Harry showed him, you're meeting him without the formal structure. Yes. Why? Harry looked at the letter. Because the formal structure was for establishing facts on a record. We've done that. What's left is the conversation that doesn't belong on a record. He set it down. I want to know what he actually thinks. Not what he's prepared to say in front of the ICW. What he actually believes. He looked at Ragnarok. And I want him to know what I actually think. Not as strategy. Just, what's true. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. You are not as angry as you were, he said. Harry considered this. I'm still angry, he said. The anger's just, settled. Into where it belongs. The things I'm angry about are still wrong. They don't need me to be hot about them to stay wrong. He paused. And he's not wrong about everything. The war was real. Voldemort is real. The soul fragment in me is real. The threat that made him think terrible choices were necessary, that was real too. That doesn't excuse, no, Harry said. It doesn't excuse anything. But understanding why someone did what they did is different from accepting that it was right. You can understand someone completely and still disagree with them completely. He picked up his pen. I want to understand him. Completely. Not to forgive him, that's not today's project. But because understanding how this happened is the only way to make sure it doesn't happen again. Ragnarok sat back in his chair and looked at Harry Potter, 11 years old, with a Wisengamot seat in his direct control and 3 days of formal proceedings behind him and 5 names on a folded piece of paper in his pocket, and he was quiet for a moment with the quality of silence that is not empty but full. "I will inform the Saturday duty staff," he said. Sirius came to Harry's room Thursday evening. He knocked, which he'd started doing on the second day even though Harry had told him he didn't need to, and came in and sat in the chair by the wall in the way he'd begun to inhabit spaces, still carefully, but with a bit more of himself in it each day. "The Prophet's running a story tomorrow," he said. "Full front page. Potter claims Wisengamot seat, Ministry declines comment. Someone leaked the Monday session." "Good," Harry said. Sirius looked at him. "You wanted it out." "People should know," Harry said. "The more this is on the public record, the harder it is to manage quietly." He looked at Sirius. "How are you doing?" "Actually." Sirius was quiet for a moment. He had the honesty to think about it before answering rather than giving the reflexive fine. "Some nights are bad," he said. "I keep waking up expecting stone walls and the sound." He paused. "The Dementors don't go away just because you leave. He made a gesture that didn't quite finish itself. "I know," Harry said. "You don't have to be fine." "I know that," Sirius said. "It's just strange to be told it." He looked at Harry. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why are you not angrier?" "At me?" He held Harry's gaze. "I was supposed to be your godfather. I was supposed to be there from the beginning. I left you, you didn't leave me," Harry said. "You were taken. There's a difference." He held Sirius's gaze. "And you were 22 years old and your best friends had just died and someone set you up." He paused. "You didn't leave me." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "I should have found a way," he said. "To fight it. To get a message out. 10 years of Dementors," Harry said. "I'm not holding anything against someone who survived 10 years of Dementors." He looked at Sirius directly. "What I want is what we have. You hear? You better. Building forward." He paused. "The rest of it, what should have happened, I know it. I feel it. But I'm not going to spend time being angry at you for something that was done to both of us." Sirius Black sat in a chair by the wall and looked at his godson with an expression that was too full for a single name. "James really would have loved you," he said, finally. "You've said that before," Harry said. "It keeps being true," Sirius said. Harry smiled. It was the real kind, not the measured smile of the meeting room but the straightforward, unmanaged kind, the kind that happened when you weren't thinking about it. He didn't have many of those yet. He was learning. "Tell me more about the Marauders," Harry said. "Tell me something ridiculous they did." Sirius settled back in the chair with the ease of someone who has been asked the right question, and started talking, and the evening went on around them comfortable and ordinary and real, and in the morning things would be complicated again, but right now it was just this, just the two of them, just a story about 4 boys in a school who were alive once, and that was worth every minute. Saturday arrived. Harry waited in the small meeting room, not the formal chamber, the smaller one, no record quill, no ICW seal, just the stone table and 2 chairs and the blue-white light of the lamps. Ragnarok had offered to stay outside the door. Harry had said yes, and Ragnarok had not pressed for more than that. Dumbledore arrived at 10 exactly. He came in without his solicitor, as agreed, without the Hogwarts colors or any formal insignia. Just the man, old and large and carrying the weight of a very long life that had included more significant decisions than most people made in 10 lifetimes, some of them right and some of them catastrophically wrong and all of them made with the absolute belief that he was the person best suited to make them. He sat down across from Harry. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I want to ask you something," Harry said, "and I want you to just answer it. Not construct something around it." "All right," Dumbledore said. "Do you still think you were right?" Dumbledore was quiet. And this quiet was different from the first meeting's silences, which had been navigated with the precision of someone who understood that every word was a piece of evidence. This quiet was simpler. More honest. "I think," Dumbledore said, "that I was right about the stakes. About what Voldemort would do if not stopped. About the genuine horror of a world under his power." He paused. "I think I was wrong about my right to be the person who decided how to stop it. And I think," another pause, longer. "I think I told myself a story about you that made it easier. The chosen one. The boy who would be willing. The child who had been prepared." He looked at his hands on the table. "I told that story so many times that I stopped noticing it was a story I'd constructed." Harry looked at him. "Do you understand what was taken from me?" Harry asked. Dumbledore met his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I do." He didn't qualify it. Didn't add the "but" that would have diminished it. Just, "Yes, I do." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to Hogwarts in September," he said. "I've decided." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Not because of the loyalty compulsion, that's gone. Not because I've been managed toward it. Because I've read the curriculum and I want to learn and it's the best option available." He paused. "I want you to understand the difference." "I understand it," Dumbledore said. "I'm going to learn what I need to learn," Harry said. "Including the things your curriculum doesn't cover. Including what I need to know about Voldemort and the Horcruxes and what actually needs to happen. On my terms and in my own time." Dumbledore nodded. "I may need information from you," Harry said. "About the Horcruxes. About the war. About the things that only you know." He held the old man's gaze. "If I come to you for information, I need you to give it to me directly. Not filtered through what you think I should know. All of it." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "That," he said, "is something I am going to have to work at." He said it without defensiveness, as a genuine statement of fact about himself. Withholding and shaping information is a very old habit. "I cannot promise you I will succeed immediately." "I know," Harry said. "I'm not asking for a promise. I'm telling you what I need." He paused. "And if you can't do it, I'll find other sources. I have people now. I have resources. I'm not dependent on your information being complete." Dumbledore looked at him, and something in his expression was, Harry couldn't name it. It wasn't grief and it wasn't pride and it wasn't regret exactly, though it had the quality of all three. "No," Dumbledore said. "You're not." They sat together for a while after that, and it wasn't comfortable exactly, it was too complicated for comfort, but it was real, and real was what Harry had been working toward since the morning Bark Fong took the first spell off and the room came into sharper focus than it had ever been. "The Horcruxes," Harry said. "How many?" And Dumbledore told him. Chapter 6. The new board. August in London had the particular quality of a city that has forgotten what weather it was supposed to be having, too warm for rain, too grey for summer, the air sitting heavy and undecided over the rooftops and the river and the particular stretch of street above Gringotts Bank where the magical and the mundane existed in their permanent unacknowledged proximity. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the Hogwarts letter. It had arrived 3 days ago, not by owl, because he'd been at Gringotts and the ministry had been notified of his location, so it had come through the formal correspondence channel, delivered by a very official-looking Gringotts messenger who had clearly been expecting more ceremony from the moment and had received instead Harry sitting at his desk reading the Horcrux documentation and saying thank you, just leave it there. The letter had been sitting on the corner of his desk for 3 days, opened and read and fully processed. He looked at it now with the particular quality of attention he gave to decisions he'd already made, not reviewing them, just inhabiting them one final time before they became action. He was going. He had always been going, or the version of him that existed underneath 67 spells had always been going, and now the version of him that existed without them was choosing it cleanly, with full information and no compulsion, and the distinction mattered enormously and would probably only ever fully matter to him. He put the letter in his document case. Outside in the corridor, he could hear Sirius moving around. Sirius was an early riser now, had been since his third day at Gringotts, as though his body had recalibrated to the opposite of the stone cell schedule. He moved around the early mornings with the careful attention of someone relearning their own habits, making tea, reading, occasionally doing the wand work exercises that the Gringotts medical healer had recommended for dexterity recovery. In the evenings he talked more. The stories had been coming back in fragments and Harry had been collecting them the way he'd collected his tin box under the cot at Privet Drive, carefully, with full attention to what each thing was. He went out into the corridor. Sirius was in the common area with a cup of tea and a legal document he'd been reviewing, the compensation filing Sharpax had prepared on his behalf, which had more numbers in it than Sirius had expected and had produced an expression of faint, shocked unreality that Harry had recognized as the particular response of someone who had stopped expecting good things and then received one. "Morning," Harry said. "Morning." Sirius looked up. He looked better than he had 2 weeks ago. He would look better than he had 2 weeks ago for the next several years, in a gradual accumulation of recovery, and Harry understood this with the patience of someone who didn't expect everything to be quick. "Ragnarok wants you at 10. Something about the ICW report." "I know. Did you eat?" Sirius looked at the table, which had no plate on it. "I was going to." Harry went to the door and knocked the pattern for the duty goblin. "Breakfast for 2, he said, when the hatch opened. Then he came back and sat down across from Sirius and picked up the compensation filing. "Has Sharpax explained the annuity structure?" "He has. I didn't understand half of it." "The half you need to understand," Harry said, finding the relevant page, "is this column. That's the annual provision figure. That's what you have to live on, fully secured, before you touch the capital." He set it on the table so Sirius could see. "The capital stays in the Gringotts managed trust until you decide what you want to do with it. Sharpax recommends leaving it for at least 2 years before making any major decisions." Sirius looked at the column. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone confronting something they weren't sure they were allowed to have. "That's enough," Harry said. "Yes. I was going to say a lot. That too." Sirius set the document down. He wrapped both hands around his tea. "What do you want to do with your life, Harry?" he said. "Not the Horcruxes. Not the Wizengamot. Not Voldemort. What do you actually want?" Harry looked at him. The question wasn't strategic, it had the quality of something Sirius genuinely wanted to know, apart from all the rest of it. "I want to learn things," Harry said. "Properly. Without someone deciding in advance what I'm allowed to know." He paused. "I want to find out what I'm actually capable of." He thought about the corridor practice session, the way his magic had arrived instantly and stayed precisely where he put it. "I want to build something. Not tear down. I've been taking things apart for 6 weeks. I want to know what the building part looks like." Sirius nodded slowly. "What kind of something?" Harry looked at the wall. He thought about the 14 nations with pending scans, and the ICW investigation, and the Wizengamot seat with its 23-19 vote, and Amelia Bones' investigation into 1981, and Narcissa Malfoy sitting across a table telling him her son deserved a clean slate. He thought about Arthur Weasley, who his son had mentioned believed Harry was being wronged before anyone had said so publicly. "A world where the next kid in the cupboard doesn't stay there," he said. Sirius was very still. "I don't mean me specifically," Harry said. "I mean, the conditions. The way it was possible for what happened to me to happen to me. The Wizengamot votes nobody checks. The imprisonments without trial. The compulsions nobody scans for because nobody's looking. The systems that make it easy for powerful people to decide the lives of people who aren't powerful." He looked at Sirius. "I have a Wizengamot seat. I have the ICW investigation as a precedent. I have Amelia Bones running a review of the 1981 procedures." He paused. "Those are not personal victories. Those are tools. Breakfast arrived through the hatch. Harry got up and brought it to the table, and they ate, and the morning was comfortable in the way mornings were becoming comfortable, and the city moved around them outside and above, and after a while Sirius said, "Your mother would have said exactly that." "Tell me," Harry said. Sirius told him. The ICW report arrived at 10 o'clock in the form of investigator Marchand, who came in person with 2 junior investigators and a document case that had gained weight since the last time Harry had seen it. She sat across from Harry and Ragnock in the formal chamber with the quill and the seal, and she opened the case and placed the report on the table. It was 108 pages. Harry looked at the cover page. International Confederation of Wizards, Special Investigation, Findings regarding the person of Harry James Potter, Application of Magical Constructs without Consent, and Related Matters of International Magical Law. The headline findings, Marchand said, in her precise, cadenced English. For the formal record and for Mr. Potter's information. The full report is his to keep and read at his convenience. She opened to the summary page. First finding, the 67 constructs identified by Gringotts Bank are confirmed as illegal under Article 9 of the Magical Persons Protection Charter, specifically, as non-consensual magical interference with the person of a registered magical individual. This finding is unanimous across the investigating panel. Harry nodded. Second finding, the attribution of 38 constructs to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore is confirmed. The ICW is formally referring the matter to the Magical Persons Protection Tribunal, which is the relevant judicial body for offences under Article 9. She paused. The tribunal has no connection to the British Ministry of Magic or the Wizengamot. It sits in Geneva. Timeline? Harry asked. A preliminary hearing will be scheduled within 60 days. Full proceedings may take longer. She turned a page. Third finding, the proxy voting arrangement in the British Wizengamot, in combination with the confirmed compulsion enchantments, raises significant concerns under the ICW's Persons of Influence Protection Guidelines. The ICW is recommending that the British Ministry conduct a full audit of proxy arrangements for magically significant individuals. Ragnock made a note. Fourth finding, the investigation identified 3 additional cases in member nations where magical children described as persons of prophetic or political significance had received scans following Gringotts filing. 2 of those scans returned results. Both are currently under investigation. Marchand looked up from the report. The ICW considers your case a precedent, Mr. Potter. The findings here will be cited in future proceedings. I know, Harry said. That's important. Yes, she said. It is. A pause. The 5th finding concerns Peter Pettigrew. Based on Sirius Black's testimony and the physical evidence submitted, specifically the magical trace records from the night of October 31, 1981, which Gringotts investigators recovered from the Ministry Archive, the ICW has formally requested that the British Aura Department open an active investigation into Pettigrew's current whereabouts. He did not die in 1981. He is somewhere. The room was very still. They're going to look for him, Harry said. Yes. Under ICW monitoring, which means the search cannot be quietly closed. She turned another page. The 6th and final headline finding. The ICW Oversight Committee has reviewed the British Ministry of Magic's response to Gringotts' Mordrak invocation, specifically, the statements made in public and in official correspondence that characterized the Gringotts proceedings as a commercial dispute and questioned the validity of the evidentiary findings. The committee has formally censured the ministry for those statements and required a public correction. Harry looked at Ragnock. Ragnock's expression held the particular satisfaction of a man who has played a very long game and is watching the board resolve. The minister's response? Harry asked. Was issued yesterday, Marchand said. The Ministry of Magic formally acknowledges the ICW findings as accurate. She paused. Cornelius Fudge also issued a personal statement expressing the ministry's commitment to the welfare of all magical persons. Did he mean it? Sirius had come in midway through the meeting and was sitting at the far end of the table with his tea, because Harry had stopped minding and Sirius had stopped asking. He said it with the flat directness of someone who had spent 10 years thinking about the ministry's commitment to things. He means to keep his job, Harry said. That's not the same thing, but it's workable. He looked at Marchand. The Dumbledore tribunal proceedings, I may be called as a witness. You will be, Marchand said. Your 14-page statement has been submitted as part of the initial referral. But the tribunal will want live testimony. I want to prepare you for the fact that this may come while you're at Hogwarts. Harry nodded. I know. I'll make it work. Marchand looked at him for a moment. She had a quality he'd noticed across all their interactions, a precise, careful respect that was not personal but not impersonal, the respect of a professional who has assessed someone and found them worthy of taking seriously, which was not the same as warmth but was in its own way more reliable. One more thing, she said. Off the formal record, if you permit. Go ahead. She closed the report. She looked at Harry directly, without the quill moving. I have been doing this work for 30 years, she said. I have been in rooms with adults who have been wronged by powerful institutions for 30 years. They come in with their anger and their grief and sometimes their shock, often their shock, because they did not see it coming. She paused. You are 11 years old, and you came into this situation without shock. You had anger and you had clarity, and you used both properly, and you did not let either become the wrong thing. She paused again. I wanted to say that. Not as an official finding. Harry looked at her. Thank you, he said. For doing this properly. You didn't have to. I did have to, she said. It's the job. But the way she said it held something more than the job, and they both knew it. The Prophet ran the ICW report findings on Tuesday morning with a front page that Harry read over breakfast and found accurate enough. ICW confirms, 67 illegal spells on boy who lived. Dumbledore faces international tribunal. The subheadings covered the ministry's censure and the Pettigrew investigation and the Black exoneration, all in a cascade of information that the Prophet was visibly struggling to present without its various editorial positions colliding with each other. The letters page, which Sirius read aloud at breakfast with increasing entertainment, was a collision of wizarding public opinion that ranged from outrage at Dumbledore to outrage at Gringotts to outrage at Harry to support for Harry to 5 separate letters about whether the ICW had overstepped its mandate. One letter, from someone signing themselves a concerned parent, said simply, if what was done to this boy was done in our names and for our safety, then we owe him more than headlines. Harry read that one twice. He'd been thinking about the public dimension of all this, not strategically, not in the meeting room sense, but in the human sense. There were people in the wizarding world who were genuinely upset, genuinely rethinking things. There were people who had believed in Dumbledore with the kind of wholehearted faith that made the current situation feel like the ground shifting under their feet, and that was real and deserved acknowledgement even from Harry, who was the reason the ground was shifting. He was not going to perform sympathy for people who had benefited from systems that had harmed him. But he was also not going to pretend that change wasn't complicated, that the people who had grown up inside the narrative weren't real, that the disruption he was causing landed in a vacuum. He added it to the list of things to think about properly. The list was long and growing, which felt like health. Diagon Alley on a Wednesday in mid-August was a different experience than Harry had expected, largely because he'd had no expectations to speak of since he'd never been there. Gringotts had arranged a quiet approach through the private entrance rather than the leaky cauldron, and he'd come with Sirius, who had wanted to come, and Harry had wanted him there, and Ragnarok had sent 2 discreet security goblins who moved through a crowd without being noticed in the way of people who are very good at their jobs. Sirius moved through the alley with the careful attention he brought to all open spaces, but with more ease than 2 weeks ago. He'd bought new clothes on Monday with the first draw from the annuity and was wearing them with the slightly self-conscious quality of someone who wasn't quite used to things fitting, which Harry found familiar. They didn't comment on the parallel. The alley itself was extraordinary. Harry had read about it and built a picture from documents and Sirius's descriptions, and the picture had not covered the sensory reality of it. The smells, mostly, old parchment and something alchemical from the apothecary and fresh pastry from a place that had its door open and the afternoon crowd threading through all of it. The sounds. The complete and total normalcy of a world going about its business in ways that were entirely not normal by the standards of everything Harry had grown up with. He stopped outside Ollivander's and looked at the single wand in the window, which was on a faded purple cushion and looked like it had been there since the shop opened. "Ready?" Sirius said. "Yes," Harry said. Inside, the shop was exactly what the descriptions had suggested, narrow, crowded with boxes, smelling of sawdust and something older. Ollivander himself appeared from between the shelves with the soundless efficiency of someone who has been doing the same thing for a very long time and has made it into an art. He was old and pale-eyed and he looked at Harry and said, "Harry Potter. I've been expecting you." "I know," Harry said. "I've read about you." Ollivander blinked. People, Harry was learning, rarely said that to him. "Have you? You made my parents' wands," Harry said. "Mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, good for transfiguration. And willow, 10 1/4, swishy, good for charms work." He paused. "I'd like to know what you make of me." Ollivander looked at him for a long, assessing moment. Then he said, "Hold out your wand hand." Harry held out his right hand. Ollivander produced a tape measure and measured in 13 places with the focus of a craftsman who is reading something in the numbers, and then the tape measure fell to the floor and he disappeared into the shelves. The first wand was beech and dragon heartstring, 9 inches. It produced nothing. Ollivander took it back immediately. The second was maple and unicorn hair, 11 inches, which generated a warm pulse of light and then a small, alarmed shower of sparks that knocked a stack of boxes sideways. Ollivander said no before Harry had finished processing the reaction. The third was holly and phoenix feather. Ollivander paused before handing this one over, with the specific quality of a man revisiting a decision he'd made before and questioning it. Harry took it. It was warm in his hand from the first second, not the tentative warmth of possibly compatible but the immediate, complete warmth of something recognizing itself. His magic arrived in his hand and moved through the wand and the wand moved through his magic and for a moment the air in the shop lit gold from floor to ceiling in a clean, sustained burst that had nothing startled about it, just presence, just power finding its proper channel. Ollivander was looking at him with an expression Harry couldn't fully read. "Holly and phoenix feather," Harry said. 11 inches. Pliable. He turned it in his hand, feeling the balance. It was right in a way that was almost too obvious to name, like finding a word that fits. "What's the other wand?" "The one this is the brother of." Ollivander was very still. "You know about that," Ollivander said. "I read about wand lore," Harry said. "I know phoenix feather wands from the same phoenix are rare, and that you mentioned having 2 from the same bird in your correspondence with the ICW Wandmakers Guild in 1982. He held the wand. "Whose?" Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. "The wand that gave you your scar," he said. "You and phoenix feather. 13.5 inches. Unyielding." A pause. "You know whose." Harry looked at the wand in his hand. He thought about what that meant, about the soul fragment, about the prophecy, about the specific phrase "power the Dark Lord knows not." He thought about the conversation with Dumbledore on Saturday and the list of Horcruxes and the fact that one of them was currently sitting behind his scar. He held the wand steady. "How much?" he asked. 7 galleons, Ollivander said. "As always." He paused. "Mr. Potter, I know," Harry said. "The shared phoenix feather. The connection." He looked at Ollivander directly. "It's information. I have a lot of information now. What I do with it is my choice." Ollivander looked at him for a moment. He took the 7 galleons. He looked at Harry one more time with his pale eyes and said, "Your parents had fine wands. I hope yours serves you as well as theirs served them." "Thank you," Harry said. "I intend to make sure it does." Outside, Sirius was waiting against the wall with his arms folded, and when Harry came out with the wand he looked at his face and said, "How was it?" "Interesting," Harry said. He fell into step beside him. "Which shop next?" "Books," Sirius said. "Though I suspect you've already read half of what they stock." "Most of what they stock," Harry said. "But I want to see what they have that's not on the curriculum." He looked at Sirius sideways. "And I want a proper trunk. Not the one Gringotts issued. Mine." Sirius looked at him. The gray eyes were warm in a way they hadn't been at the beginning, a warmth that was accumulating with each day, each meal, each story, each morning cup of tea. "Flourish and blots first," he said. "Then the trunk maker. Then there's a place on the side street that does food that is significantly better than it has any right to be." "Deal," Harry said. They walked through Diagon Alley together on a Wednesday in August, and the security goblins moved through the crowd behind them unnoticed, and people noticed Harry. Of course they did, the aura and the prophet and the ring and the plain fact of what the last 6 weeks had been, and he met the attention without performing anything, just present, just himself, and it was fine. It was good. He was in a place that was part of his world and he was learning its textures and it was his to learn. He bought 14 books. 3 were on the Hogwarts list and 11 weren't. Sirius didn't comment on the 11. He bought the trunk, dark leather, well made, his initials in the same bronze as the document case. He ate something extraordinary from a small place on the side street where the owner recognized Sirius and went through a complicated emotional process in about 4 seconds before composing herself and saying the usual. And Sirius had said yes with the quality of someone reclaiming a small, ordinary thing. They were heading back toward the private entrance when someone said, "Harry Potter." Harry turned. A boy about his age was standing with a woman who was clearly his mother. She had the same red hair and the same broad, freckled build, and the boy was looking at Harry with an expression of someone who has been reading about something for 2 weeks and has now encountered it in person and is not entirely sure what to do with that. Harry looked at him. Red hair, blue eyes, several inches taller than Harry, with the hands of someone who worked outside and the expression of someone who found most things interesting. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm Ron," the boy said. "Ron Weasley." "My dad, Arthur Weasley," Harry said. Ron blinked. "Yeah." He said, "He's mentioned you." "Well, not specifically, but," he stopped, clearly recognizing that this was not coming out the way he'd intended. He tried again. "He said you're going to Hogwarts in September." "I am," Harry said. Ron's mother, Molly, Harry thought, from the family records he'd read as part of the ministry research, was looking at Harry with an expression that was warm and complicated and doing a very human thing where it was trying to contain several feelings at once. She looked at Sirius and her eyes did the rapid recognition of someone putting recent news together with a face and she said, "Mr. Black," with a quality that was not quite formal. "Mrs. Weasley," Sirius said, and his voice held the particular weight of someone navigating a social situation they are not fully equipped for but are trying. "We're in the same year," Ron said, to Harry, with the directness of someone who has decided the safest thing is to just say the thing. "Hogwarts. First years. I've got 5 older brothers who've all been so I know pretty much everything about it, if you want." He stopped again. Looked at the books in Harry's arms. "You've already read all of that, haven't you?" "Most of it," Harry said. Ron considered this. "Do you want to read what I haven't read and I'll tell you what I know about the actual school? Like, practical stuff. Where the good classrooms are. Which portraits will give you directions and which ones lie. Stuff like that." Harry looked at him. He thought about the question Sirius had asked at breakfast, "What do you want?" And about the answer he'd given, the part about learning things properly and finding out what he was actually capable of and building something. He thought about the list of things he was going to Hogwarts with, the wand, the seat, the ICW proceedings, the Horcrux knowledge, the full picture of what Voldemort was and what dealing with him actually required. He thought about going to school with all of that and what it would be like to do it alone. That sounds like a fair exchange, Harry said. Ron's face did something quick and genuine, the specific, slightly startled happiness of someone who asked for something they half expected to be refused and wasn't. Yeah. Yeah, Harry said. I'm Harry. I know, Ron said. I mean, I know, obviously. Sorry. Don't be, Harry said. Molly Weasley was looking at Harry with an expression that had resolved into something warm and direct and decided. You must come to dinner, she said. Before September. Both of you. She included Sirius with a glance that was an invitation and also a statement about what kind of person she was. We're in Ottery St. Catchpole and the Fleur's always open and Arthur would, he would very much like to meet you properly. Harry looked at Sirius. Sirius had the expression of someone who hasn't been invited to dinner by a kind person in more than 10 years and doesn't quite know what to do with it yet, but is going to figure it out. We'd like that, Harry said. They exchanged information, Ron and Harry with the slightly awkward efficiency of two 11-year-olds discovering they might be friends, Sirius and Molly with the more careful warmth of adults navigating something new, and then parted at the corner, Ron looking back once with the expression of someone already planning what to tell his brothers, and Harry watching him go with a thought that was not strategic and not architectural and not about Horcruxes or the Wizengamot or Mordrak's claws. He just thought, that was good. He let it be good, fully, without any part of his mind running threat assessment underneath it. The night before the Hogwarts Express, Harry sat in his Gringotts room for what he understood was the last time as a primary residence. Not the last time he would be in this room, or this building. His vault was here and his legal affairs were here and Ragnarok was here and this was in many ways the most important place in the world to him in a way that had nothing to do with the stone walls and everything to do with what had happened in them. But the room itself, this specific room where he'd sat in the chair and held the armrests and felt the spells come off one by one, after tonight it would go back to being a guest room, and he would go back to being a client of the bank, and what he'd been in between would be the story. He thought about the story. 6 weeks. He'd arrived here in the dark hours of his 11th birthday, pulled out of Privet Drive by 3 goblins through a gap in the garden wall, with a tin box of small possessions and a paintbrush in his hand and 67 things on him that weren't his. He was leaving with a trunk, a wand, a Wizengamot seat, a godfather, a strategy for defeating a Dark Lord, and a list of 5 Wizengamot members to talk to carefully and a possible friend with red hair who knew which portraits gave accurate directions. He had a list of active things in progress, the ICW tribunal proceedings, Amelia Bones' investigation of the 1981 failures, the Pettigrew search, the parallel scans in 4 countries, the Horcrux research, the Wizengamot audit of proxy arrangements. Things he had started or contributed to starting, that would continue without him needing to be in this room managing them. He had Ragnarok, who would manage what needed managing and would expect Harry to be a client worth the bank's considerable institutional anger, which was itself a form of expectation that Harry found sustaining in the way that genuine expectations sustain, as opposed to compulsions. He wrote Ragnarok a letter. It was short. Thank you. For the wall, and the chair, and the water that tasted like something. For the documents and the 72-hour window and the morning you sent the black file to Amelia Bones at 10 at night because I said she'd read it immediately. For treating me like a person who was present. I'll be in touch. There's still a great deal to do. HP. He left it on the desk. He went to Sirius's room and knocked. Sirius was still up, he often was, reading or writing the letters he'd been carefully composing to the people who had mattered before Azkaban and had remained people after it, the list of them getting longer as his memory recovered its full color. He looked up when Harry came in. Ready? He said. Yes, Harry said. He sat in the chair. Will you be all right? While I'm at school. Sirius looked at him with an expression that had affection in it and something else, something older, a recognition. I'm going to find somewhere to live, he said. I've been corresponding with a property agent in Edinburgh. And there's a job possibility. He paused. Nothing grand. But something to do. Something that's mine. What kind of job? There's a horror training consultant who needs a practical instructor, Sirius said. Old colleague. She reached out when the prophet ran the hearing story. He paused. She said she'd always believed I hadn't done it. She was right, Harry said. Yes. He turned his teacup in his hands. I'm going to be all right, he said. Not immediately. Not all at once. But I'm going to be all right. He looked at Harry. And you? Harry thought about the wand in his trunk and the 14 books and the window seat on the Hogwarts Express that he'd read about in Sirius's Hogwarts stories, the one on the left side that caught the best light as it left London. He thought about Ron Weasley and the list of things the portraits lie about. He thought about McGonagall, who had said I would when he'd asked her to be someone he could actually talk to. He thought about the defense against the dark arts classroom and the transfiguration practical and the library, which by all accounts was enormous and almost certainly had things in it that weren't on any curriculum. He thought about a soul fragment behind his scar and a Dark Lord who wasn't fully dead and the fact that the prophecy said power the Dark Lord knows not and that Dumbledore's best guess and his own reading of the ancient magic suggested that power was something relational, something rooted in the human things, the love and the choice and the willingness to keep going not because you've been compelled to but because you've decided to, and that the version of Harry who had arrived at Gringotts 6 weeks ago, suppressed and managed and unknowing, would have been a much easier thing to destroy than the version he was now. He thought about the difference between being prepared for sacrifice and choosing, with full information and free will and no enchantments running underneath, to stand in front of something terrible because you've decided it's worth standing in front of. The sacrifice enchantment was gone. He'd decided anyway. That was the thing that mattered. I'm going to be fine, he said. Better than fine. He paused. I'm going to be exactly what I actually am, without anyone's modifications. And whatever that turns out to be up against whatever's coming, he met Sirius's eyes. I think it's going to be enough. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Yes, Sirius said, quietly. I think it is. King's Cross on the 1st of September was everything the stories had promised and several things they hadn't. Harry arrived with Sirius and they moved through the station's normal morning crowd, commuters and tourists and a school party of children in high-visibility jackets, all the ordinary machinery of a day, and Harry watched all of it with the easy attention he'd been developing since the suppression came off, the particular quality of presence that came from not having part of his mind permanently allocated to threat management. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 was, up close, exactly as nondescript as Sirius had described, a solid-looking wall that had nothing special about it except that it wasn't. Harry put his trolley at it and walked through without hesitation, and the scarlet steam engine on the other side and the cloud of smoke and the noise and the families and the owls and the 100 small details of a world that was entirely his greeted him all at once. He stood for a moment and just let it be real. Sirius came through behind him and stood beside him and looked at the train with an expression that was doing something complicated and private and Harry didn't look directly at it, just gave it room. They found a compartment. Harry stowed his trunk and got his window seat, left side, catching the morning light as it came in from the east. Sirius stood in the corridor outside the compartment door with his hands in his pockets. Term ends at Christmas, Harry said, through the open window. I'll be there, Sirius said. Platform 9 3/4. I'll be the one who looks like he hasn't eaten Christmas dinner in 10 years and is fully prepared to make up for lost time. Good, Harry said. Eat something before you come. I know what Hogwarts Christmas dinner is like and you'll want to have space for it. Sirius made the laugh, less rusty now, more itself, settling back into what it probably was before everything, and said, Who told you about the Christmas dinner? McGonagall. She said the house elves treat it as a personal challenge. They do, Sirius said. They absolutely do. He looked at Harry through the window with everything that couldn't be said by someone who'd had 10 years of practice not saying things and was learning again how to say them. Write to me, he said. Every week, Harry said. Don't do anything I would have done at your age. I'm going to do several things you would have done at your age, Harry said. But I'll be more strategic about it. The train whistled. The platform began its shift of movement, families calling last things, trunks being finally and definitely stowed. Sirius stepped back from the window. Harry leaned out slightly and held his gaze and held it until the train began to move and the platform began to slide away, and Sirius standing there in his new clothes with his hands in his pockets, thin and upright and present, was the last thing on the platform he saw before the curve of the track took it. He sat back in the window seat as the train gathered speed and London fell away outside, the backs of houses, the industrial edges, then the gradual greening of the landscape as it went from city to country, all of it moving past in the particular quality of something beginning. The compartment door slid open. Ron Weasley came in with his trunk and his owl and his expression of someone who has been working out what to say and has decided to go with honesty. "This compartment all right?" he said. "The others are, come in," Harry said. Ron came in and managed his trunk and his owl and sat down across from Harry with the specific relief of someone who was also new to this and also not going to admit how new it felt. He looked at the window and the countryside going past. "My brother Fred says the food trolley comes around just past Watford," he said. "What time is that?" Harry asked. "About 40 minutes. Ron looked at him. "He also says the pumpkin pasties are significantly better than the cauldron cakes, which sounds wrong because pumpkin sounds wrong, but he was serious about it." "I'll try one," Harry said. "Me too." Ron looked out the window. Then, "My dad came home on Monday and said the ICW report was historic. Like, actually historic. He paused, choosing words. He was very excited and then he got quiet in the way he gets when something makes him feel something strongly, which he does sometimes. He looked at Harry. "He wanted me to tell you that." Harry looked at him. "Tell him thank you," he said. "And tell him that what he thinks matters. That good people inside bad systems deciding to say so is one of the ways things change." Ron looked at him. "I'll tell him. He'll write it down. He writes things down when they matter." "Good habit," Harry said. Outside, the landscape was fully country now, green and rolling, the kind of country that seemed to get more itself the further it got from the city. Harry watched it go by and felt the particular, complete quality of being in motion towards something, not pushed, not compelled, not aimed by someone else's hand. Moving under his own power toward a thing he'd chosen with open eyes. The Hogwarts Express carried him north toward the castle and the term and the 100 things waiting to be learned and understood and worked through, and beside him Ron Weasley was explaining the Quidditch House Cup format with the enthusiasm of someone who has been waiting to tell this to someone who would actually listen, and outside the window the hills of Scotland were beginning and they were green and enormous and entirely real. Harry listened. He watched the landscape. He held the wand in his inside pocket with 2 fingers against the wood, feeling his magic warm and present and completely his, and he thought about everything that had happened in 6 weeks and everything that was still ahead of him, and neither the behind nor the ahead felt like weight. He was here. He was himself. Without modification, without management, without a single enchantment running underneath the surface of the person he was. Whatever came next, the Horcruxes, the Tribunal, the Wisengamot seat, the Dark Lord who wasn't fully dead, the architecture of a better world he'd told Sirius he wanted to build, whatever came next would meet him as he actually was, not as he'd been shaped to be. The train rounded a long curve and the first glimpse of the castle appeared on its hill, enormous against the northern sky, lit by the afternoon light, and Harry looked at it the way he looked at everything now, directly, fully, without a filter between himself and the fact of it. He said, "There it is." Ron looked up from his Quidditch explanation and looked at the castle and said, "Yeah." And then, after a moment, "First time seeing it properly?" "First time seeing anything properly," Harry said. Ron looked at him. He didn't ask what that meant, which was the right instinct. He just looked at the castle too and said, "My brother Charlie says it gets better every year. Like, every year you know more of it and it gets bigger, not smaller." That makes sense, Harry said. He says the library's the best part. Harry smiled. I know. The train moved on. The castle grew. The light changed across the hills. And Harry Potter, freed, unshackled, fully present, entirely himself, went to school.